there are other sentient beings in this planet and they have feelings like me, you say. The epiphany dawned upon him as he realized every word he ever said could influence humanity like a ripple flowing out across a pond. That was all of our collective imagination. Or you could just say, who gives a fuck? Just get on with your life, you daft cunt. There you go, I gave you some publicity. No one even knew who you were before this story. Right, this is going to be episode 13 of Listen, Loco. Now, for anyone who isn't aware, 13, obviously, something of an unlucky number, right, in history. That's what people say. That's like sort of the low-level interpretation. For people who don't know, that actually comes originally. I once alluded to this on the Summer Insight episode. People will have forgotten this. There's a little bit of trivia for you all. The reason why, like, 13 is supposed to be unlucky is, and specifically like Friday the 13th is the famous one, obviously, is because actually like years and years, we're talking like over 1,000 years ago or something, that was where like the Knights Templar were all betrayed on Friday the 13th by like the King of France or some shit who wanted to just like steal their lands and money and stuff. So he wrecked them all on the same day. Like he had them all rounded up. They were all like, you know, burned at the stake and stuff. And the reason I'm bringing this up, Veteran, you'll probably think, what's this got to do with anything, you know, is because Loco on this show, we've only had 12 episodes. This is the 13th one, has already himself betrayed many people associated with H2K. He's repeatedly called out Prolly, made sort of some quite ridiculous intimations that just because H2K wanted Loco over Prolly, that somehow implies Prolly is not as good a coach as Loco. Again, I don't really understand the logic. If he thinks H2K is a shit org, then how would that work? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Okay, I want to correct myself. I want to correct you. But if you and Monty were so high up on Prolly, like saying, oh, any team Prolly on, what if it does incredibly well. I do think Prolly is a good coach.
A fact, but, yeah.
I do think Prolly is a good coach, but you guys were like making him out to be perfect, where there were problems on H2K, there were problems on 100 Thieves, and like H2K reached out and tried to get me while they still had Prolly as coach, quoting like they were having coaching problems and they were having management problems. Whether like that doesn't make Prolly like a bad coach, that doesn't make Prolly like a shitty coach, but you guys were just making him out to be perfect. So yeah, I wanted to get my 2 cents.
When was that?
It was a complete straw man, all of that. Like, basically, when we did the episode where it was like me, Monty, and Loco talking about TSM's history at Worlds, we were talking about, you know, like the fact that they hadn't managed to get many good coaches. And so Loco was like, well, who could they have gotten? And from what I remember, I believe like Prolly was one of the names we mentioned. We mentioned some others. And then as you just saw there, Loco then built it into some mad straw man that we ever said Prolly's perfect. All we said was he could be a coach of TSM. I mean, I don't know why Loco hasn't figured this out. Like, you don't have to be perfect to coach TSM. But okay, he hasn't figured that out himself. Yeah. Maybe that's what he thinks this problem was. Oh, you know, I was so good, but I wasn't quite perfect, was I? So anyway, the point was, he's already betrayed Prolly. He's betrayed loads of people who were players, you know, thinks they're all fucking shit or whatever. He's wrecked the org loads of times. So I'm just saying, veterans, watch you back, because Loco, like, maybe it's the TSM connection, the whole Svenskeren thing. I don't know, but it runs deep with him. So also, to be fair, you're one of the few return guests that actually will return to this show at this point in time. Loco tends to scare him off after about 2 return appearances.
I've never been on Listen Loco. I was on Loco and Foreign the Versus as well.
That's true.
It's a continuation.
You know, we'll see.
Doran, you shit on me for being loyal to people, and you also shit on me for criticizing people. Like, you have to find an angle.
You're starting to figure out... No. Two things there. One, you've picked up on the theme. I like that. I'm shitting on you no matter what. Yeah. Secondly, I'm basically shitting on you because you're you. So there you go. So not yet. And obviously the catch-22 there is you can't stop being yourself, can you? Yeah. Secondly, you have to also understand that like part of talking shit is it doesn't actually have to mean anything. You know, it's just having fun and it's just banter.
I mean, here's the thing, though. I do think it's banter, and I do think it's a lot of fun. But we actually have a voice, and people tune in, and we are a platform for a lot of people, or for sometimes even orgs. So, do you guys know who RJS is? RJS D&D God. He's this North American solo queue player. So RJS D&D God was Woong's original account name, and this guy is like 17, 18-ish, and he started playing under that moniker, and he got all the way up to Challenger, and I picked him up as a sub for Goldcoin United. And one time when I was just randomly streaming, someone asked me, hey, what do you think about RJS D&D? Like, LS thinks really highly of him. He was in Korea for like 6 or 7 months grinding, and he got 400 LP, something like that. And he's been maintaining that. I was like, oh, with Alexi, his actual name, I was like, Alexi, I think was a decent player. He communicated well, but compared to Fly, who couldn't communicate well when he was on Goldcoin United, the level of play difference was just so massive. So I'm not sure what I can really say about Alexi. I just know when I had him and both Fly, even with Fly's shitty communication, Fly was leaps and bounds better. And Alexi actually messaged me on Skype, and he was like, hey man, like, you saying stuff like that hurts my chances. People don't know the context of that being from like years and years ago. And I was like, it's just an offhand comment I made. But from thinking from his point of view, if any owner was watching or anyone that might potentially pick him up was watching might think of him negatively. So I do think like what we say has impact.
In lieu of this,
Yeah.
were you talking about, was this
It's
HGK offer
amazing,
from
isn't it?
2016 or 2017?
The Prolly thing.
Yes.
It was during when I was on Goldcoin United, so it was I want to say 2017.
Yeah,
has
that
to
would be
be.
2017. Okay, I can't speak to that then.
Okay.
Right, wait a minute. Can I just clarify something?
Sure.
Have we either just started with another classic banter, pure shit Loco Doco anecdote, or did the anecdote have an ending that I haven't heard?
And the anecdote is what we say
Okay,
and what we say in general has effect on other
Yeah.
people. So
I was afraid of that.
We should be
I was
responsible.
very much afraid of that. So basically, the anecdote is this: hey guys, you know this player that you don't know or give a flying fuck about? Nah, who is he? Some guy you don't know or give a flying fuck about. But anyway, I once made a comment about him, and he contacted me and was like, that might hurt my chances, dude. And so then, well, Loco, why didn't you just reply, who gives a fuck? Who are you anyway? And then continue on with life. But instead, I said, oh my God, wow, there are other sentient beings in this planet and they have feelings like me, you say? The epiphany dawned upon him as he realized every word he ever said could influence humanity like a ripple flowing out across a pond. That was all of our collective imagination. Or you could just say, who gives a fuck? Just get on with your life, you daft cunt. There you go, I gave you some publicity. No one even knew who you were before this story. You know what? I don't even know the guy, but whoever he is, I think he's twice as bad as Loco says. There we go. He never gets a team. Fucking just crashes and burns it. I hope I see him at McDonald's. And when I see him, he goes, hey, I used to be a guy. And I go, I don't even fucking care anymore, mate. I just leave the McDonald's. There you go. That's the end of the anecdote.
Damn, Cartman.
Like, man.
I mean, Cartman was right. Gingers don't have souls. You're heartless, Doran.
You know what? Listen. Give him a chance, veteran. Give him a chance. He's trying to work his way into banter. Okay, right? You have to realize that's written on a whiteboard behind him. He's like, if in danger, I'm going to pull out the Cartman gambit. Right? Any moment that I need to, I've got that in my back pocket.
You just say, Loco, you're right, Foreign. No one cares what you say. I agree. Let's move on. That's what you say. You don't immediately jump into abusing all gingers, man. Like, you have to work your way up.
All right. Anyways, let's start with the show.
The show's already started. Well, you know well. This is like a warm-up break. This is the start of the show. What are we talking about? So anyway, I mean, it's the way he dares to say that after telling us some dog shit anecdote about some person we still don't know.
My anecdotes are dog shit.
No one get. You know, whoever that kid is, don't know, but fuck you in particular. There you go. Right? The show started. Yeah.
The show started, but I really do want to say this, and of course, Foreign would rather I would just leave this and just get on with life. But on the Prolly thing, upper management did have a really skewed opinion of Prolly, but it was a wrong opinion of Prolly. And the reason they had a skewed opinion of Prolly is because Prolly wasn't necessarily very communicative with like upper management, because honestly, it's not really that much of their business, though it is their investment, and he didn't see it that way. But I want to say, if you did get that offer, I saw nothing in 2016 HK that would indicate, no offense, that you would be a better alternative than Prolly. Prolly was, for me, the best coach in the West. What, hands down. And I think the vast majority of players who have worked with him will also attest to this. I know that upper management had some issues with him, but these weren't issues born out of gameplay oriented stuff and how he was coaching and managing the team. These are more due to how he works with upper management, but nothing that actually affects on a team level basis. I know that on 100 Thieves he is much more involved than he otherwise would be, and he's also given responsibilities over, like, Kelsey is director of a CAD team as well as scouting as well as head coach. So he accepts that these are roles that need to be fulfilled, and he's given it over to people who deserve it. So yeah. Quick
To start off talking about the LEC, as it is now called, let's just start here. So, veteran, at the moment, you are not associated with any team, right? You're not working with anyone right now?
Right, true.
So, as one of the rare people who will be on this show, who isn't at the moment currently associated with the LEC, what do you actually think of franchising from the perspective of, obviously you worked for one of the orgs that didn't make it into franchising.
Yeah.
What do you actually think about like franchising version 1, as it were, for Europe?
So the big thing, the big issue I've always had with the concept of franchising, because a lot of people were bringing up franchising as something that is going to, in the end, be very good for players, and in the end, it's going to be very good for players that bring immediate value to the brand. What you've actually done once you've eliminated relegation and once you've made everything much safer for the orgs in this sense is you've taken power away from the players, particularly the most competitive and talented players who were previously able to brute force their way into the LEC, and what you previously had to have if you wanted to keep your LEC spot, and you've given that power to the organizations. The organizations can now focus much more on turning a profit, which is obviously what every organization wants to be able to do in the end. But this will happen at the expense of competitivity in the long run. That's my honest belief, and I honestly also believe that when it comes to rookie talent, they're actually way more likely to suffer on a system like this, because whereas you can say the risk of taking rookie talent is gone now, so is the risk of taking brand-based talent, and you're more likely to go for a big name that might otherwise fail. Like, we know, for example, that there was only one import that actually made it into playoffs last split in the LEC, or the ELCS as it was back then, and you had big names like Nagne, for example. They spent 12k a month on Nagne to bring him over, and it didn't work out, and they lost their spot, and they also couldn't capitalize on the Nagne branding because they didn't have the spot anymore. But now there's nothing stopping you bringing in big names over rookie talent, and you're more likely, if you don't make it to the World Championships, to be able to still produce content while Turtle's off doing interviews and stuff. He's a safe investment right now, even if you don't make Worlds, because people will watch his content. Rookies, their counterbalance to this is that they were able to brute force through national leagues, through Challenger, and qualify for the LCS whether you liked it or not. Misfits did that. Old H2K did that. Vitality did that. All of these players did that, and that was how they proved their worth, but that's all gone now. So for me, it was always going to go the way that it's gone in North America with franchising, where you now have teams with an average age of 24, and rookie talent is being left to the wayside. They're given the ACAD leagues in North America, but they don't have like a set structure like the National League system, which has immense viewership and actual opportunities for branding. So I still think that in Europe, franchise is not going to be as damaging as it was in North America. I think in North America, it's a death knell in a lot of scenarios. There are now 4 teams with majority imports in North America, and this number is only going to go higher. The average age is only going to go higher, and rookies are more and more likely to be ignored.
Okay. Well, so I actually want to counterpoint that. I think the biggest sufferers, or the biggest people taking damage from franchising, is actually the middle class of LCS. This is something that Sebastian Park said, and I actually thought a lot about. So let's first address the rookies getting fucked over in both LEC and NALCS, or just LCS now. I think rookies actually, like, teams do want to invest into rookies. Like the Academy League in NALCS is now an actual Academy League instead of being a farm league, or instead of a spot farming league where you want to bring on imports and you want to bring on the best available talent to try to get into LCS and sell the spot. Instead, it's actually a place where you develop rookies, and I think rookies are seeing more and more play in Academy, and there's been several players that moved up from Academy to LCS this year in NALCS, such as Wiggly, such as Vulcan, Dokla last year, continuing to LCS this year, and rookies are getting more of a shot due to Academy being actual Academy and no longer being Challenger. As for Europe, all the teams are required to have a National League team now, and the National League teams are still going to be there, and teams are still going to pick up the best players for National League, while you can't bust your way into LCS like you talked about due to relegation not being there anymore. Like teams that are bottom feeders in Europe, bottom feeders in NALCS, like they are going to want to look into picking up rookie talent. Now, here's where I actually do think the middle class is suffering a lot. So if you're a middle class player, so if you're not a player with a brand, if you're not a player that's extremely good, you're actually not that valuable to orgs, and orgs would rather pick up rookies. Would I rather pay somewhere between, let's say, like 200 or 300k for a middle class player, or pay 100k for a promising rookie from Academy? And I think most teams are leaning towards paying the rookies and going for the rookies, or just straight up telling the middle class players, hey, if you're not going to take the pay cut, we're just going to go with the rookie instead. So I do think rookies and like the players that are good that have never stepped onto the scene still have a way to get into LCS and way to show their skill level, but the middle class players are suffering a lot. LCS is very, very top heavy in terms of salary, and yeah, a lot of it, the rest of it goes to rookies, and the middle class are dying.
I agree that your middle class players are also suffering. Basically, anyone that doesn't have a really big brand is going to suffer, is my essential argument. And the reason that I isolate rookies in particular is that what you're saying is similar to what I've always heard in terms of rookies should be able to benefit of this because it's less risk for it. But what you're actually seeing is that teams wait until the last possible moments and then they grab profit, they grab Pyrion, they grab imports with no offers that they can also get for the same price as rookies, but also have a pre-existing brand. Those are 2 ex-SK team members. That's what Orgs are actually doing. The rookies that were picked up by SK were largely picked up because they literally came in at the last minute, replacing other teams that decided this is not a viable profit model. And still, those rookies are rookies of a pre-existing brand about them, the Mad Lions roster. Mad Lions were always going to transfer their entire roster over had they gotten the spot, and they briefly did, but then they got replaced because they actually spent a lot of money building brands on these players. But that's like a lot of investment that doesn't actually transpire into the kind of profits that are required to be able to keep a franchising spot. It's not actually viable to build up a rookie player's brand. Mad Lions are actually evidence of that at this point. And SK were able to profit from that, but they're not getting the franchising spot that everybody believes that they should have. Having money is not the same as guaranteeing you're going to be in the green every year. It's expensive to do that. It's not expensive to take players like Profit, to take players like Pyrion, to take players like Wodded, who everyone likes Wodded these days, but Wodded is a diamond player in Europe. He is a diamond player in Europe, and there are much better rookie supports for him. But you'd rather take him because he has a brand. Huh?
Is he like an actual perma diamond player? Where
he's actually a perma diamond player.
Jesus. Damn,
I heard. But you'd rather. But he has a brand. He's more attractive to any org. He's more attractive to any org.
Yeah, that's.
And Pyrion's attractive, and Profit's attractive as well, because these guys will turn them out a profit even if they don't actually make it into Worlds. Like, again, I'll bring up the World Title analogy, and also what you're saying is not what happened in North America either. You had one organization, which was Cloud9, that actually bet it all on their rookies when they removed Jensen and Sneaky, but no other organization was having the single most successful year any organization had in the history of esports, and therefore no other organization is able to take that kind of financial risk with what were their biggest stars. And the risk paid off. Now Cloud9 itself is a bigger brand than Jensen or Sneaky, and hats off to Jack for doing it. And hats off to Reaper for doing it as well, because it's the kind of decision that you need. You need someone confident enough to say, no, these players are good enough to do it. Give me the control of the roster that I need, and we'll do it. And Jack went along with it. But Jack was not. It was not as big a risk for Jack to do it as it would be for any of the organizations in the NALCS right now, for whom League is their majority branding. These players are their majority mainstay.
I think you have a misunderstanding of like branding and like orgs being in the green. Like, very, very few NALCS or orgs are in the green, and they're bleeding money. Like,
yeah, they are.
So
that's why they're not taking these risks on rookies. Because some of them are trying to get the fuck out of there.
No, they're
like,
taking
some
the
of them
risk.
Are just trying to get
they're
out.
taking the risk on rookies in academy, and through academy, players are actually getting to move up. Like,
what do you mean taking the risk though? Why is it a risk to put a player on your academy team?
Well, like, what do you mean by then taking a risk?
You mean giving them an opportunity?
Yeah, giving them an opportunity.
Right, okay.
That's what we're talking about, right? Look, because the whole conversation is about rookies getting fucked over under this new franchising system. But my argument is, under the franchising systems, rookies now have more spots that they need to fill, and teams are actually looking into them more and more so due to the Academy League, and there's a natural progression from Academy to LCS that's consistently happening.
No, there was a natural progression from Challenger Series to LCS. There is no definite progression from Academy to LCS. There's none. There's no definite progression from the National Leagues to LEC either. There was a natural progression before. If you're good enough, you qualify, you're in. There's no natural progression anymore. The Academy team, like, those spots would have existed, but those spots also would have existed as a direct natural progression into the LCS beforehand. They just now exist as subcontracts of the organizations that are currently in LCS, and they can choose to do something with it or not. The vast majority of them will choose not to do anything with it. That's why you didn't see when 100 Thieves were replacing their rosters, even though they did bring one over from their CAD league last year, they're bringing in Bang now. Like they're not.
Of course,
these guys are.
Of
not
course,
going
they're
to
bringing in
like
Bang, but
they were before.
what I mean is the old
Yeah,
challengers.
This guy has openly said that he wants to get into streaming. He wants to learn English so he can build a brand. He's openly said it in interviews, and everybody loves that, and everyone should love that. That's really good, and that's really good for Bang. But the rookie players that could have come in instead are going to suffer for it. But this is the kind of thing that they are absolutely right to be focusing on.
No, veteran. But before, in the old LCS system, before franchising, rookies weren't even getting a shot in the Challenger series, because Challenger was just about farming into LCS and trying to get the best spot possible. So I ran a Challenger team, like me, United, like Goldcoin and United. Like, people weren't taking risk on rookies because they needed to get the spot, and they didn't want to go.
As far as I can tell, here's the scenario that I feel like is the miscommunication here. Is like Loco is basically just saying, I mean, he went too far by making it all expansive, but the part that he's saying initially is, compared to the old system, at least he's mainly obviously talking from an NA perspective, the upgrade now is at least they're using rookies in academy, because you can't win the spot anyway. So as you see, there are certain teams that have, all rookies in a NA academy for this league. The problem is this, like, Loco then made it sound as though, and then there's this natural progression from there to the main team, which I think is what Veteran contests. He's saying, no, Cloud9 did that, but aside from Cloud9, and quite frankly, teams who just look like they want to save money on the spot, most people don't look like they're trying to get rookies from academy. Most people look like they're just using academy for whatever, and then they sign the big name player for their top team anyway, and hence you get teams like, I mean, this isn't an NA episode, but I think Optic would be a great example of the fact that people don't care whatsoever about rookies, because they sign literally anyone with a name rather than a rookie to the main team.
Yes.
We can talk about Optic's roster building.
Well, no. Like, because I want to say that what my comeback was going to be, because Phone didn't actually bring up what I was going to immediately bring up, is that that's very true of North America, and I have a lot of criticisms about coaching staff in North America for not actually doing the effort to put in the time to scout and then say, no, we can take on this NA player, we can take on this NA support, we can take on this NA jungler, we can absolutely do this, even though I know from experience that players will be very, very resistant to players who will otherwise look like really strong talents when they end up in the LCS. There isn't a single rookie talent in the LCS right now that everybody, in the LEC I should say, that players were demanding to play with. This even, like, I had to even fight for players like Norskeren, for example, that everybody would say looks like a top 3, top 4 support player, and it was really obvious this was going to be like that. It was really obvious Caps was also going to be like this as well, but you didn't hear anything about Caps until he was already signed up Fnatic for a good reason. Players themselves also buy into the idea that big name equals better talent automatically without putting in the scouting work. That's what the staff has to do. And I agree that in North America, the staff were not confident in their scouting ability to actually counterpoint to these players, and as a result North America ended up with no real player base to come in from. But the thing is, in Europe, players have done this every single year and gone all the way to the World Championships, whether people liked it or not. And it's gotten to the point where EU Mid became its own brand. So yes, people are now very happy with taking on rookies in EU mid lane, because this is Jizuki, Caps just from last year. And every year you're going to find other EU mids that were able to come up. In North America, that wasn't able to happen because the organizations all saw big name as potentially better talent, and also it's a safer investment if you don't actually make it. And what franchising does is enable a poisonous way of thinking that North America already had, and in Europe it will allow this kind of poisonous thinking to fester, and it will allow it to fester because under this system that is actually the correct way to think.
Oh wait, I disagree with that completely. Like, now there are 100 spots that are or 50 spots that are available almost purely for rookies and for teams to take risks on through academy.
Not in the LEC, not in the LCS.
Okay, then we can say for LCS that's definitely not true. There's 50 spots that are available purely for rookies and purely for teams to take risk on brand new players and actually develop them, because that has no kind of meaning whatsoever.
And the CAD team is not going to go to the World Championships. Like, these spots existed beforehand.
No, like, challenger teams weren't trying to pick up rookies. Challenger teams wanted to pick up the best
Yes, I know, and I addressed
player.
that by saying that I agree that there was already a poisonous mindset in North America about this, and franchising just encourages that. It was also the wrong mindset.
Franchising changes that. Franchising changes that, because now you don't want the best players possible for your academy team. You want the most potential players. You want the rookies that we're talking about that are getting fucked over. Like, through franchising, now challenger scene is actually about growing players.
No, you want to save money, but you're still not telling me how on earth that guarantees that they're going to go from there to the actual LCS.
if you're good in academy and people recognize you're good in academy, then you get multiple offers and your team is left in a position where they're like, damn, we either have to move this player up or he's going to get sold to an LCS team and he's going to be an LCS player.
Who determines that? Because no one was determining that when you actually had to win to get out of Challengers Series.
I mean, who's
no one was able to determine.
Who's determining that? 10 decision makers, or one decision maker on each team times 10. Like, any of the teams can reach out to...
Yeah, and they're enabled to use the same kind of logic they were using beforehand when they looked at Challengers Series as, let's spend a lot of money on big names because that equals big talent.
No, not on Challenger scene. They don't do that on Challenger scene. Like, who's spending big money on Vulcan? Who's spending big money on Wiggly? These players showed up in Academy, and they were able to showcase how good they were, and they had offers from LCS teams that weren't their own team. Wiggly had offers from non-CLG that wanted to get Wiggly, so CLG's left in a spot. Well, we're gonna get rid of Reignover, and Wiggly's a good talent, and if you don't move him up, if you don't give him a starting spot, then he's gonna go to another team and become an LCS player. So like, naturally, these academy players are getting LCS offers if you're good enough in academy and you can show your skill level. Same thing for Vulcan. Like in Challenger, before franchising, in the old Challenger system, players like Vulcan, players like Wiggly, it was extremely hard for them to even get a spot or even to get coaching and play competitive. And now you have spots for that in LCS.
It was bad because the same decision makers were saying that they weren't good enough then. They're now saying that they're good enough now. It's not that they were good enough. Imports. They've already maxed out on their imports, so they need to grab another player.
Veteran, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying previously in Challenger, right? If I could decide between Fly or a North American mid, of course I'm going to pick Fly. But now...
I know you are.
Now in Academy...
I'm saying you'd be wrong to.
Now in Academy...
Players, you would have also been wrong in Europe to do a similar thing with a lot of European mid lane players. But people in Europe, but players in Europe made their own fucking teams, and then they got their friend in as coach, and then they all went up because it wasn't like an org down thing. So these players were able to brute force.
Okay, sure. Let me finish my point. So with Fly, like let's take the Fly example. There's no Academy mid, or there's no North American talent that's gonna be better than Fly. Fly is legitimately like a top 6 mid laner in Korea. There's no one that's going to be better than Fly in Academy scene. And of course I'm going to take Fly because I'm competing with LCS teams to break through the challenger barrier and to get into LCS. But now Academy is not about that. Now people can take risk and they don't want to just pick up the best available player. They want to pick up the players with the most potential and the players that can grow. Under franchising, I don't see how you can make an argument that rookies are getting screwed over. I think rookies are given way more shots than before because they're no longer competing versus all these imports or all these veterans. Like, teams actively want to pick up players from scouting grounds. People actually want to pick up players from solo queue.
For their
what we'll do is make a final statement.
Yeah, okay. There's literally less spots now in the LCS. There's literally less spots. 4 teams now have majority imports because residency has now come in place. Your thing does not work the moment that these players also get residency on top of that. It's just going to keep... The decision that you made to take Fly in is the same decision these guys are going to make to take players in like Bang, because they want to get a world spot, because they want to get promoted to world championships. The same logic that you're using for why you would take Fly to get promoted to LCS in the first place. There's literally less spots now as a direct result of franchising, because teams are more able to... You're
just talking LCS spots. There's less LCS spot, and that's just going to progress. That has nothing to do with franchising.
That will progress.
No, that has nothing to do with franchising. Even before franchising, there would be majority imports. Like, even if franchising didn't happen, Piglet would get residency, Jensen would eventually get residency.
This is why I said I agree with you that there was already this poisonous mindset in, but now with franchising, it's not just like a bad mindset that made North America weaker competitively. No, let me finish. It's not just a bad mindset that made North America weaker competitively. It's now a mindset that's actually the right way to approach things in a franchising era.
No, that has nothing to do with franchising. You're saying there's more imports filling the teams because of franchising? That's just bullshit. Like, Piglet getting residency had nothing to do with franchising. Impact getting residency has nothing to do with franchising. It has to do with them being in NA for a long time. You're saying franchising somehow made it more poisonous. It's just period of time, and they got residency.
No, I said it made it more viable. It's actually correct to think about this way that the orgs were thinking before franchising in a franchising era. Do you not get this? It's correct to think this way now. It was hurting you guys competitively to think this way beforehand, but now you guys don't have to care about competitivity.
Oh.
Anyway, right, I think both sides have made their points there. The audience will have to decide which they come down on. So let's actually talk about some fucking teams that play in the LEC. Whatever. That was like a little experiment there where I thought I'd leave it and see if Loco ever actually fucking resolved any of the conflict. And just two people just kept restating their opinion over and over again while missing what the other person said. So anyway, lesson learned. We will take more of a firm hand with this episode. Let's start here, Veteran. What do you think of the change to G2, bringing in Mikyx as the support and swapping Caps from Fnatic into mid lane and then Perkz going to AD carry? What do you think of the new G2 lineup?
I mean, the obvious meme is that Perkz is basically playing AD carry for half of the split anyway in summer. So obviously he'll be fine with these champs, but I think actually Mikyx is like the biggest factor here. He's such a ridiculously mechanically strong support player. I think he's the best mechanical support player in Europe. And I think if you are a strong mechanical player like Perkz in the mid lane and you are transitioning to another role, playing with a player like Mikyx is probably an absolute dream for you. And also Perkz was always quite vocal on his teams, and Mikyx isn't so much, so he is able to counterbalance with Mikyx a bit. And I'm actually really confident in him making this transition to AD. Caps is obviously really, really good, even though he didn't have like such a strong Worlds performance. He did against Cloud9, but he didn't have such a strong Worlds performance overall. Like the EDG series, for example, didn't go too well. And the finals, he did have a bad match for the first two times, didn't go so well. And the third game, you don't really want to play Victor against that comp, even if the lane matchup is good. But the EDG series, like he was misplaying quite a bit. And in the group stage, he wasn't like as on point as we expect him to be in Europe. But Caps is still an incredibly strong mid laner and one of the best in Europe. And I'm really glad he won that 1v1 tournament, which I think is the only reason anyone really likes watching All-Stars. At least it's the only reason I watch All-Stars is for the 1v1 tournament. So I think they've just brought on a lot of really mechanically strong players, and I wouldn't be too worried about communications since just listening to the mic check and how Jankos and Perkz are actually working really well together, I actually have a lot of faith in them in that regard.
Okay. Loco,
they have three winning lanes potentially.
What do you think of this big role swap?
We discussed it a lot, but yeah, I mean, I think it's crazy to take the best or the second best mid laner in Europe and make him making your AD carry. If they could have pulled this move off somehow sending Perkz back to NA or sending him not in their competitive scene, I think, yeah, that's the biggest benefit of this move, like stealing Caps away from Fnatic. Role swaps are always...
I mean, they got to World Finals with Caps like inting a lot of games, so I'd be a bit like iffy on whether this actually damages Fnatic, but go on.
I think Caps was a huge part of Fnatic, and yeah, I definitely do think it damages Fnatic, but we can talk about that when we get to Fnatic. Like, taking Caps away from Fnatic was a huge move. For Perkz AD, mid lane and AD share a lot of the common skill that is required, and also, as we talked about, Perkz played a lot of AD carry in Spring due to funnel. So, and from what I've seen out of him in solo queue at least, he does seem like he has talent for AD carry. It's just, I don't think he's going to reach the same kind of height that he did with AD carry as he did for mid lane. And if you look across and you look at Caps and he's getting credit and he's getting benefit, oh, he went to G2, now G2 is becoming more and more of Caps' team, and Perkz' role on it is going down and down, where Perkz was top, either the best or the second best mid laner, and as AD carry, he'll maybe be fourth, maybe be third. I think it'll be incredible if he ends up as first or second best AD carry. So yeah, I think later down the line, like, it is going to run into issues of having both really great mid laners on the same team and one of them having to role swap to play and not reach the same kind of skill level.
I mean, one thing that this move, jokes about poaching aside, one thing that this move confirmed is that Perkz absolutely is like the destination for talent in Europe. Like, you look how much talent has now joined teams seemingly just to play with him. Like, in that sense, like, there's not many players in any of the, I mean, maybe you could say Bjergsen and TSM often get similar plaudits, you know, but like, this is like, if you think about it, like, I'd love to say it's G2, the orgs is doing a great job selling all these players, but it's just Perkz, right? People just want to play with Perkz.
I mean, Perkz is actually hugely influential behind the scenes. Like a lot of established and especially younger players, all basically take Perkz's words as law. Pride Stalker getting on Schalke last year, for example, was a big question mark in a lot of people's eyes. But I can tell you, people were fighting over Pride Stalker, and it seemed really strange to me that this was happening. One of my players actually was trying to convince me that we should just go for Pride Stalker, even though at this point Pride Stalker was asking for absurd money because he had gotten so many offers. And I know that it was a direct result of the fact that Perkz was recommending Pride Stalker to everybody. It's actually quite a funny story because I said to him that I just don't think this guy's champ pool is all there. And he showed me his OPGG as proof, and I had to go back 13 days before I found a single win that wasn't Xin Zhao, and that win was on Rengar. So it was mind-blowing to me, like how high everybody was on Pride Stalker at this point, but it was purely on the basis that Perkz was really bigging him up. Loads of players will take Perkz's word for what it is, and he just has a lot of respect. That's all fully earned. In fairness, he was like an insane talent when he came on the scene. When Perkz and Senkux were both in Challenger, everybody knew that Perkz versus Senkux was going to be like the future of the LCS. There was even actually an article written with that as the title. And then they actually literally did end up being the grand finals of the summer split of the LCS the next year. But Perkz has obviously kept that going. He's never had a meta that he couldn't adapt to. The funnel meta, obviously, had to play a lot of AD carries and stuff, and because I've seen how well he's adapted to each meta, I'm not that worried about him as an AD carry, but it's obviously a huge question mark. It's obviously a huge question mark as to whether or not it could go either way. I'm going to go with the assumption that it will go well, and in which case they potentially have 3 winning lanes here.
If it goes well, how well does he do amongst like European ADs? Number 1's best, number 10's worst. Everything goes well.
Well, I mean, I'd prefer to think of it in terms of like bot lanes, because the thing is, Perkz plus Mickey X will be a top 3 bot lane if Perkz actually works out. Just in terms of raw mechanical prowess, they're insane, and Perkz actually understands how to play lanes out properly. So if there isn't a random bump that would honestly be like a strange blotch on his permanent record, if there was to be one, I don't expect him to have an issue. Then yeah, I would put him top 3. I would put him below Fnatic and this is a difficult one actually. I'm choosing between
Where would you play Misfits? I think that's the one.
Yeah, like I was deciding between Misfits and Schalke, because Schalke, actually I'll put Misfits second and then G2 third and then Schalke and then Origin. Origin depends a lot on how Miffy is, but Sheriff is a really strong talent, and I know a lot of people probably in chat are pointing out that obviously Sheriff was like the last player I worked with, but Upset was also the player I worked with before that, and I just put them both below Perkz potentially, who's just role swapped. So
right, when you said that angle though, like you just teased it, that like you don't think it necessarily affects Fnatic that much because Fnatic got to the final of Worlds with, you know, kind of without Caps playing particularly well. Like with that said though, that was one tournament. Right? He was like the best player in the team the whole year. Like they probably wouldn't even have been in that position without Caps being very good, right? So
yeah, I agree. He was one of the best players.
Why isn't this a big concern then?
It's not a big concern for me because their side lanes work so fucking well now, and the big thing for me at Worlds was that they basically completely changed their jungle system for how it was in the regular split, and their jungle system being so poor in the regular split was why they ended up having to rely on Caps' mechanical prowess a lot. At the World Championship you didn't see this, and you also saw, for example, Whippo really coming out on his own, particularly in the EGG series, as the focal point of how Fnatic would make their comeback in all 3 games. Like it's a monumental change that makes me not worried about whoever they put in the mid lane. And Nemesis is a really good talent. I don't think he's the strongest of the 3 mid lane rookie talents that's coming in, but I guess we'll talk about that later. But he's definitely good enough for Fnatic to still play with the system that they were playing with last split and have a lot of success and still contest for the number 1 spot. I absolutely believe they'll still contest for the number 1 spot.
Is he better, like as a gamble, this is, you know, like the potential. Is Nemesis better than if they'd have signed like a more established name, like if they'd have gotten Nukeduck or if they'd have gotten Featherven coming back? Is Nemesis worth the gamble in that respect?
I would. I mean, okay, so I personally would, but I would say this because I know that Fnatic's like budget is not like the highest thing in the world, and I think that prioritizing maintaining this side lane set plus Boxer was really, really good for them. Like
Okay.
I would prioritize that over prioritizing the mid laner right now, knowing that there is all this rookie talent coming in that will end up being able to compete with these players. Like Nukeduck was not good enough to just 1v9. No one's good enough to just completely 1v9 anymore. Like that's just a misnomer at this point. Fairhaven couldn't even do it in North America. Like you don't have to dump all your money into mid lane to replace Caps. I think the system that they had and their understanding of the game is absolutely the thing that got them to the World Finals, and I think the decisions that they made were really, really good.
I do agree, rest of Fnatic's really good, but the mid laner is what puts your team over the top, and the mid laner is like, and still probably the most important position along with jungle. You aren't worried for them at all. Like they're competing. They're going to be competing with Caps. They're going to be competing with Featherven.
You watch the EDG series, they got dicked. Like, yeah, got dicked in the mid lane department. Like, it was a misplays for days and actually made me a bit worried coming into the Cloud9 series of how it was. They just have a really good understanding of how to play the map right now, and that's the most important thing that they should look to retain. And I think they have retained that given their roster choice.
But even, so even retaining that, right? It's not like, even if Nemesis is good, like he's still competing versus top tier EU mid laners, and they are gonna struggle if Nemesis can't keep up. You don't think that's gonna affect their performance at all? Like, even if you have the right system, if you can't build priorities, if you can't build leads in lane, like you can't get anywhere with it. Is Nemesis like good enough to stand up to all the
I agree with
laners?
that, but I've seen them not be able to build priorities in mid lane and still be able to win through their understanding of the map. But I think when it comes to Nemesis specifically, I don't see Nemesis just being completely shat on by any player barring, I'd say Nukeduck. I'd say Nukeduck if you're just talking about old established players who will just completely shit on him, probably that. Out of the rookies, Humanoid, I think, is the one who is really going to test Nemesis in the mid lane. And then obviously Caps himself will really test him in the mid lane. Actually, I forgot, but I don't know if they're counting him as an established player at this point. Actually, yeah, it has been. This is his third year now, right?
When you said that about how Fnatic doesn't necessarily have like the biggest budget to work with, obviously to a fan that will be very surprising because they think Fnatic, all that success, you know, such a fabulous team in the game. Obviously, are there many orgs you think in Europe that are able to spend more in the off season than Fnatic?
Yeah, they'll be seeing Misfits roster recently. Yeah, there are absolutely orgs that outspend Fnatic. Schalke could also outspend Fnatic if they wanted to. I don't know the kind of money that Origin is dealing with, to be honest. I think Origin made some very intelligent bets in their pool, though. But it's basically a super team of Deficio's favorites, and Deficio actually has quite good taste in players, it seems.
I know.
But yeah, they're absolutely orgs that will monumentally outspend them. They were if Misfits wanted a player from Fnatic, they were not going to be able to compete with that. And if G2 have Perks roll up to your door and say, yo, come join me, we're going to go win Worlds, he's going to do that no matter what your budget is, to be honest. So...
And there's been that article about most esports teams being heavily overvaluated, and there's going to be a lot of cutbacks in 2019. And I mean, I think like a lot of the old school orgs, especially the ones that don't have success across multiple games, are the ones that are going to suffer the most. And even the new ones that came in and spent a lot of money are going to suffer the most. Isn't it really scary for, let's say, a team like Schalke to spend a lot this season when they have, like, League of Legends is pretty much all they have along with FIFA, right? Like, how can they make...
Yeah, I mean, I believe Schalke have some new backers with it, but Schalke do obviously also have a lot of other wings outside of esports that they can draw some money from. I would be a bit worried though, because they obviously want their esports section to turn a profit at a point, but they have done a lot more to build like branding than most other organizations have, and they are one of the established names in Europe now. It gives me a bit of pause for thought. What doesn't give me pause for thought though is seeing how organizations like Fnatic have strategized around how much money they're going to spend on their roster and their team in the last few years. Having Bwipo there for this long was always a gamble, knowing that SOAS's value was only going up and up and up over the years to where it is now, and they want to be able to pay like a sixth of him if they can, a third of him if they can, for a player that they've brought up to be as talented. And Bwipo is absolutely that. So Fnatic have always been really smart about this, and they're more likely to end up in the green than most. Obviously, there's just issues with the system right now, and there have been issues with valuation of teams in general, like you've said, and this will affect the overall value of the spot in the LEC in the long run. But I think Schalke are fine for now, and I think orgs like Fnatic will always be fine. This is why they've been around for so long.
Okay,
so let's...
Go ahead.
Yeah, go on then.
No, go ahead, sorry. I wanted to ask
so
about...
let's talk then about the... Fucking hell. We can't say go on and then start talking.
No, we both said go ahead. No, we both said go ahead. So we let the other one speak and then we pause and then they spoke. Okay, but you go ahead. I'm going to be quiet.
Like, since you referenced Origin, let's talk about them next then. Because as you kind of alluded to, the interesting thing about the Origin lineup is they don't really have any name that's like, oh my God, everyone had to have this, you know, this guy in the off season. Like everyone was going crazy. Like this is the must-get player. But as you alluded to, with these being like Deficio's favorites, they're all players who are either considered like either as sleepers, like among the best in their role, or at some point have been talents of that level, you know. So is this where do you actually see this lineup as being at, Veteran? Like, can this lineup actually win the LEC?
I mean, they can contest for like a semi-final spot for sure. And they could be looking to contest for a world spot by the end of the year. Depends on how the Misfits roster goes, because Misfits for me is honestly the bigger question mark than anything. But the thing with Origin's roster, okay, so obviously I would go for Sheriff if I could, but honestly I actually wanted to go for Cold, for example, and Alphari I think is actually a top 2 top laner in Europe along with Wonder, obviously. So I actually think that just on paper.
Like, in your top lane thing, then where would you put Bwipo if Alphari 1 and Wonder 2 were
third or fourth? Third or fourth.
Oh.
Third or fourth. But Alphari 1, I think Wonder is the best laner in Europe. I think Alphari might be the most intelligent top laner in Europe, if that makes sense. The only one who would compete with him for that title would be Soaz. And I think Bwipo obviously has a really high ceiling right now. And I think that maybe this year he will just end up being like a top 2 top laner, but Alphari and Wonder are still for me the top 2. So I think Alphari is really strong on his own. I think Cold is really strong on his own, and I think Sheriff is really, really strong on his own. Nukeduck, everybody knows to be like a ridiculously strong laner, and the thing how Schalke ended up making their monumental strides in summer were basically putting top and bot lanes on really ungankable, undiveable lanes that also gave them a lot of neutral objective control, you know, the Poppies, the Brahms. And they brought out the Sejuani and stuff, and they were like, all right, Nukeduck, let's give you the counter pick. What do you want? You want Zed? Okay, go ham. And Nukeduck was basically like hard carrying them on his back to get to the finals, as it were. So it shouldn't have to be said that Nukeduck is really strong on his own. But what Nukeduck is not is like a really big commanding presence in game in terms of like being like an on-point shot caller. This was their big issue. This is why they need Amazing. Cold is a really intelligent shot caller, and he's a really commanding presence in game. And even his pathing itself, like as a jungler, is actually far more intelligent than Amazing's was. So Nukeduck has actually essentially gotten himself onto a better version of a roster he already got to the finals last year, in my opinion. I think Alphari is a better version of Vizicsacsi. Vizicsacsi has very unintelligent timings in which he will actually trade in lane, whereas Alphari is just one of the, again, as I've said, I think he's the smartest in Europe when it comes to how he plays out his lane. I think the bot lane is the only question mark to me in the sense that I don't know how good Miffy is going to be. But I've seen all these interviews from Miffy where he said that he actually had to take time to like learn jungle, for example, to help his jungler and all of this stuff while he was on TSM. So I think that. So I think that maybe that you guys didn't read this, okay? But I think that maybe
in spring where he helped Mike Young by learning jungle because he felt like Mike didn't know enough.
Yeah. So he said this. So obviously this is going to impact how you're playing 2v2 lanes. If Miffy's able to focus on that as well, and you already have a strong commanding presence in Cold, I've seen firsthand how this actually works out. The Miffy Amazing dynamic in Origin was really, really strong, where Amazing was basically playing primary and Miffy was basically playing Capcom, which is a way of saying that Miffy would tell Amazing when he's just wrong and we should actually just do this and that instead. And Miffy would basically take over the comms later it went into the game. And Peke would basically make sure they don't start killing each other. And so when Peke was removed from Origin, I was like, okay, this is not going to work out. Doesn't matter who you put in, doesn't matter how good Power of Evil is. It's just you need to stop these guys fighting each other. But Cold is like a really, really calm and chill guy. He's absolutely the kind of personality you want to pair with all of these players. Not to say that all of them are particularly toxic, but a lot of people are now thinking of players on that roster, and there's at least 3. Actually, no. All 4 of those players have all had some sort of like riot issue when it comes to their toxicity at some point. So...
Okay. I guess the 2 interesting follow-ups.
Absolutely who you want.
The two interesting follow-up to that would be, so one thing that Ben said, the owner of Misfits, when we had him on regarding Alphari versus Soaz, is he gave Alphari a lot of credit for his laning prowess, but he said Soaz was a smarter player in terms of knowing how to win the game, knowing what to do mid and late game. I honestly don't know Alphari that well. Can you dig a little bit more into Alphari being intelligent, especially regarding like the mid and late? And also, if you could compare him to Soaz in that regard, that would be something that would be pretty enlightening.
Well, Soaz is one of the best team players in Europe, if that makes sense. Like, if you have Soaz on your team environment is automatically better in the long run. The way that he conducts himself in VOD reviews can get extreme, but it gets extreme at the right points where it should get extreme. But otherwise, he is the adult. He is the adult in the middle of all of the kids, and it's a really, really good presence to have. What I'm going to say right now is going to be taken the wrong way immediately, so I'll have to clarify. Alphari is basically British Smitty, and Smitty is actually very, very smart about the game. And Alphari is very smart about the game as well, but Alphari is never going to be your out-of-game leader. He's never going to be the guy that puts you all on the same page before you even get into the game. But he is absolutely a guy that you can talk to for strategic advice. He's absolutely a guy who knows how his lane matchups will play out and how the mid to late game should play out. And he is absolutely the kind of guy who could take over communication later on in the game. And the things he say, as blunt as they will be and as shorthand as they will absolutely be the right things. But Soaz will lead your mentality as well. Like Soaz is one of the best players I ever worked with in terms of just like working with someone. This guy always seemed open. He never seemed difficult to coach like his tweets made him seem. He always seemed the opposite of that to me. But I think Cold and Miffy will be taking the majority of the communication when it comes to Origin itself. I actually forgot their name for a second there because they were actually Australis initially, weren't they?
Yeah. Another thing that I have to ask is, you talked about Nukeduck carrying the team all the way to finals, but it wasn't like Nukeduck 1v9 as we talked about earlier. 1v9 situation doesn't exist anymore. I do think Amazing. What do you think about Amazing not finding a spot? Like, Amazing was a huge part of Schalke actually having a resurgence, and like he made finals, and like him not getting a team was super surprising to me as a friend, because I worked with him back on TSM, and also as like a competitor, someone that's really good not getting a spot.
Who would you replace on the LEC with Amazing?
It's hard to say because I don't know all the LEC junglers and like how good they are. I just know around the skill level for Amazing and what it brings in and out of game. And someone of that skill level in and out of game not finding a spot like must mean everyone else is above that, right?
Before you answer, Veteran, you need to address like how you two are defining how good Amazing is, because as you hear, Loco keeps saying that as well. Like he thinks Amazing's really skilled. Like, what is your actual thought of like 2018 Amazing as we go into this?
So this was going to come into my like answer to what Loco was saying anyway, so this isn't that big of a segue. The thing of Amazing for me is Amazing worked out for Schalke so well. Because honestly, this is true of almost anything, by the way, guys, but don't take this to absolute extremes and just start doing cocaine or something. But having a bad direction is better than having no direction at all. And Amazing made sure that his team were all on the same page. There were caveats to this, and they took care of those caveats in draft. Like the Poppy Braum thing that they were getting away with for forever worked so well because they weren't actually very intelligent with how they played around neutral objectives. Because whereas they may be all on the same page now, it wasn't necessarily the absolute correct strategic page to be on, and this is an advantage that I think players like Cold and Maxwell and Memento actually do have. Well, okay, Memento in the early game, maybe not so much like as the game progresses later and later on, have over a player like Amazing. But Amazing is the guy that you stick in when you're not going to have direction from any other place. Considering it this way, I don't see why Splice, G2, Fnatic, Schalke, any of the legacy teams would look to like instantly replace their jungle with Amazing, and I do see why Schalke would look to go for Memento over Amazing, because Memento fulfills much the same function as Amazing does, while honestly being like a more skilled jungler, particularly in the early game. This guy's early game parving is almost legendary at this point. The way that he was doing it on worse teams like Roccat, like Giants, it's really, really strong. So I don't see any of these legacy teams rushing to replace their junglers anyway. And then when it comes to the new teams coming out, obviously Deficio knew the function that Cold had on his team, so why would he need Amazing for that? And then when it comes to SK, I would assume it's largely to do with the fact that most of those Mad Lions players wanted to stick with each other. So if you wanted Crowley, who was the guy that was really showing up in the last EU Masters, you basically had to take Werlib and Self-Made Man with them. Initially, there were actually an entire package. People wanted to get Mad Lions players beforehand for their rosters. Admittedly, it wasn't like Fnatic were offering any of them before anything like this, and a lot of them were challenger offers, but the thing you would hear from these guys is you have to take everybody else. We'll only go as 5, or Nemesis will only go as Self-Made Man, stuff like this. So I can see reasons why all of the orgs chose not to go with Amazing, and I'm really trying hard to remember who Rogue's jungler is right now. Do I remember?
I have a
Kickiss, isn't it?
Cagel performs the same function as Amazing as well. And Cagel is very, very intelligent about the game, to be honest. Like, Cagel was phenomenal. And obviously people are going to point out that I'm biased because I just worked with Cagel. But I've never seen somebody have such a confident grasp on mid to late game shot calling as Cagel did, transitioning to a role that he hasn't played for the last years or so.
So K-Drill, Self-Made, and Kickies are XL.
Kickiss performs the same function as Amazing.
Okay.
And Kickiss also now has a really solid reputation of bringing up rosters that were struggling, much the same way that Amazing does, but Kickiss does perform that same function. And
what about for Self-Made on SK?
I mean, I already gave the rationale for why I think SK went for Self-Made over Amazing.
Package, because of the package thing, right?
Yeah, it's the package deal. I do want to say though that Self-Made Man is a really, really talented jungler. That being said, the SK roster obviously looks like a roster someone had to make last minute because they did kind of have to make it last minute. But it's not that Self-Made is like a horrible choice by any means. If I had Self-Made on my team and the roster wasn't working out, replacing Self-Made with Amazing wouldn't be done because I think that Self-Made is a terrible jungler. It would be done because Amazing could be the solution to the problems of not having a direction in that team. Do you get the difference there? Like when we replaced Shook, or when we replaced Centaur, and it wasn't because they were necessarily the problem. It was because the incoming player could be the solution to what we needed at that point.
It's more of what the new player brings than the old player lacks. I understand.
Yeah. And most of these orgs have someone that fulfills the same function that Amazing was fulfilling on Shulker that got them all the way, so they don't have a necessity to bring Amazing on. That's the problem right now.
Okay. Right. What about the Misfits team then? Like, does this lineup is this really a team that could win Worlds?
Win Worlds? Oh, we just go all the way there.
And that's what Ben said. That's probably why Dorian's repeating it.
You told me.
Well, obviously Ben said that. He just dumped a lot of money building that roster. Like, it obviously has a lot of really big names, but it doesn't look as strong to me on paper as stuff like Origin, as stuff like Fnatic, and as stuff like G2, and as a result, doesn't even make Worlds in my estimation right now. The WoW, I assume, is getting a follow-up.
I mean, I'm not an expert on Europe, and it's definitely your region, but just from, I would say, like, name value and international performance, it's hard for me to put Origin over Misfits, like, just from the players they have.
Yeah, which would be the mistake. Like, I actually think that Origin have top 3 players in every single role, and I think when it comes to God, okay, so this is probably going to end up somewhere, but I think when it comes to Misfits, there are question marks with regards to the jungle and the support position. And when I say the support position, see, I see your face right now, but honestly, Prey was doing so much in that lane, it was unreal. And I actually have, like, a lot of stories when it comes to, like, the Prey Gorilla lane when we were scrimming them in 2016 HUK and stuff, but also you can see from the way that the Tigers had to draft and the way that Longzhu had to draft the immediate issues that you get with taking a player like Gorilla. It's similar to immediate issues that you get with Ignite, except it's literally the complete opposite issue. One of the first things that I ever did in analysis, it was actually for like a Fnatic application, but then HUK took me, so I never actually had to send it in. was I literally went through every single Rocks Tigers game. This was all to justify the ADC bans that I wanted to bring up. They only basically played 3 AD carries. They played Ashe, they played Kalista, and they played Varus.
Yeah,
3 engaged champions. I went through every single game that they had played, and I went through every single engage that Gorilla did, and Gorilla's engages were literally successful, like, between 20 and 30% of the time. I can't remember the exact number right now. Whereas Prey's engages were literally successful 86% of the time, was what I found. I did this with like every single player whenever they were on an engaged champion. And these are the kind of the thing is that this guy was known as like the Janan, known as like the Tahm Kench for a reason. This is a particular playstyle that he's been locked into. When it comes to laning prowess, I was always rating Prey over Bang ever since the 2016 H2K scrims, where Prey was legitimately like 1v2ing this lane. It was absolutely unbelievable the kind of stuff that Prey was doing in lane. It was stuff that I'd never seen before, and stuff that I had to get more and more educated about, and luckily Forgiven was willing to go on like really long paragraphs. He was really loved playing against Prey, and he really loved playing against Uzi about the things that these guys were doing. But I think without that, and then with a player like Hans Sama, who personality-wise doesn't necessarily come off as the most confident person, and does kind of need like a nudge, this is potentially one reason why the Mikyx iteration of the roster didn't really work out properly, because this guy is not very vocal in lane at all. I actually don't see that bot lane being the absolute dominant powerhouse that everyone thinks. I think the Reckless bot lane will still be more dominant. I think if Perkz and Mikyx work well together, that will end up being more dominant. And I think Sheriff and Miffy, if Miffy comes back up, that will end up being more dominant. And then outside of that, the function that Gorilla plays in the team has never had to be engaged, because they've literally been able to rely on his AD carry for that before they rely on him. So it's a myth to talk about Gorilla as if he was just this all-encompassing support player. He's not Matter. Matter was able to be those things, and Ignite is able to be an engaged player, but he's not able to necessarily play like all the other functions that Gorilla is able to perform. So I have a question when it comes to Gorilla. When it comes to Maxwell, Maxwell had slips in performances, but he's back on the roster. And obviously they have the amazing option. They really need to bring it. But one big thing of Maxwell was that a strategy that was really viable for Misfits and how we got victories versus Misfits. So we were literally banning Shen, and the reason we banned Shen is because if we banned Shen, Maxwell would also make poor engaged decisions, and we would be able to capitalize on it. That was basically a guarantee, and we gambled on that, and it actually completely worked out. Then after we banned Shen, everyone else banned Shen, and the same thing would happen. Like, they don't have players in the jungle and support position that are actually really strong decision makers when it comes to engages. And I say it's going to end up somewhere possibly, because I know Maxwell's been criticized before and he's tweeted out about it, and like, I do hope that they prove me wrong, and I really like Maxwell as a player. And at one point, he was absolutely like one of the best junglers in Europe, hands down in every regard. But those times have kind of gone. They've been and gone, and there are holes in this roster that I don't see on other teams.
Being as this is a team which clearly did spend big and had money to spend and was one of the ones that was kind of a mover and a shaker, if it was up to you then, which types of jungler or support would you have rather had that would make this the team that, you know, because obviously on paper, a lot of people think this is like one of the best lineups in Europe. So what type of a player would you have preferred in those spots to make the team work?
Well, bot lane? Okay, so the thing is, Vander is still around, and Vander is really well-rounded. And I actually think Vander brings a lot of leadership in-game. I say leadership, he talks a lot, but he says exactly the kind of things that a player like Hans Sama can play Capcom to. Yes, obviously I'm talking about a player that I've worked with on 2 teams now, but we're talking about available support players, and I'm assuming the caveat is that I can't just immediately rip a player that's already on another roster. So I'd say
unless you think, for example, they should have signed Mithy instead or something, you know, if it was one that's like a plausible one.
Speaking on to the Mithy point, like, we criticized Misfits for having Gorilla and some of the faults that Gorilla might have, but Mithy last split, or even last year in its entirety, also suffered from a lot of problems where you criticize Misfits.
I've addressed this.
And Misfits have holes in their roster that other top teams might not have. I think Mithy's a way bigger question mark than Gorilla is.
Well, no, we've seen Miffy be completely well-rounded. I've never seen Gorilla be completely well-rounded. But I did address this because I actually share your concern, and this is also why I brought up like the things he apparently had to do on TSM that would really not work out if you're just trying to be a mechanically strong 2v2 lane. But Miffy is very decisive on all of these kinds of things. And again, bad direction is better than no direction at all. And if he can get back to focusing on his role, this might not be such an issue. But crucially, I don't think Sheriff needs someone like that as much as someone like Hans necessarily needs someone like that. And I say this from having already worked with Sheriff. I think it's more damaging for Misfits to have someone like that than it is for Origin to have someone like that. And I think Origin's jungle position makes up for it, whereas I don't know if Misfits' jungle position is able to make up for it now, because I think Cold is actually very intelligent on all of these things. So you're not necessarily relying on it there. Where you can potentially rely on it on the Misfits roster, and where the big bucks have gone, is with Soaz. Well, actually, I guess the big bucks may have gone to Febiven. I obviously don't know the salaries. The big bucks have gone to the solo lanes. I think Soaz is very intelligent on everything I just said, but the meta has not been like you're engaged tank tops for a while, and eventually people are going to realize that you just ban Gnar, as they have had on iterations of Fnatic where they've been relying on Soaz to make these kind of decisions before. If he got Gnar or Jarvan in one split, they won the game, and if they didn't, they would lose the game, and people eventually figured this out and banned it out. And we're unlikely to end up back in like a tank-heavy meta anytime soon for top lane. So it's really RNG if you can rely on that kind of stuff coming from Soaz. If you can, Misfits suddenly ratchet up the ranks as a really top-tier team, much similar to how they were really good in laning phase last split. Again, they had mechanically strong players like Mikyx on their team. But when the meta shifted away from win at 20 minutes or lose, they obviously holes were poked in them, and I think it's a meta-dependent team again as a result. But for a meta, that's very unlikely to occur again.
For Maxlore, I definitely agree. I think there's going to be... Or for Maxlore, I have to give you credit because I don't know Maxlore, so I can't talk about the specifics of Maxlore. But for Gorilla, to say he's not been a well-rounded support, I think Gorilla's been inconsistent, but Gorilla has been great on Engage champions before, on Thresh, on Alistar. And what's been happening with like the Varus and Ashe stuff, Prey is the best Ashe player, the best Varus player like the world has seen. And their Prey's Engage being godlike, I don't think necessarily takes credit away from Gorilla. It's just giving credit to Prey where it's well deserved.
To be fair, Loco, he did say that he studied all the engages and that Gorilla's engages worked 20% of the time. So like, what you just said doesn't actually count.
No, so if Gorilla's engages are working 20 to 30% of the time, like, do the enemy team who he's engaging on have flashes or not? Is he using the engage to burn flashes? What's the average engage?
These are things you're supposed to take into account before you engage. By the way,
if you engage and you burn a flash, then that's
I agree. That's successful.
So like just taking the stat of like just taking the stat of 20%, 30%, whatever the stat was, and then there not being like a baseline. What are the other supports?
I put that. No, that's a successful engage.
Okay, so
if you don't lose anything but you burn stuns, that's a successful engage.
Sure. So what are the other supports engaging at? Are they also at 20%, 30%? Or are they at 60%, 70%?
That's true. I didn't do for every single support.
Then we can take credit away from Gorilla there. And I can even give him the point during that Rocks era, maybe Gorilla didn't engage well, but there's definitely been periods of time where Gorilla has looked amazing consistently on Alistar, amazing consistently on Thresh. So to say Gorilla hasn't been
I think basically everybody will be fighting me on this as you are. I don't think that I have to go through every other support players as well to say that that is a bad stat. It does not work most of the time. But I do think that what my point is that I don't see actual points unless the meta really favors Soaz, where these guys are going to get commanding engages off multiple times, like on a consistent basis. That's the term I should use here. That's my issue with them. With Origin, I do see where they're going to do that because I think that Cold is performing at a level that Maxlore isn't.
So if
Feb is quite silent.
Okay, so a fun question: if you could switch Cold and Maxlore on Misfits, or you could even duplicate Cold and just remove Maxlore from the equation, do you think Misfits looks better with Cold?
Yeah. That's ridiculous then. Yeah, that's ridiculous then. Yeah, I think that's an immediate upgrade.
Wow.
What about the return of Febiven? Is this the right team for him? Is he the right player for them to have on this team?
Febiven is such a good mid laner, actually. Like, it's such a good mid laner, but despite that, you know, obviously because the team wasn't built properly around him on Clutch Gaming, they could have one good split and then one very not so good split. Again, it's kind of meta dependent on whether or not he's able to show off the kind of performances that he's had, but if he's able to have those performances translate into wins, I hope it is. It's definitely not a bottom tier team. This is a team that is competing for a world spot, and I think that's exactly what he wants. Whether he'll make the difference on it or not, he has this tendency to default into going to Azir, and Azir is the kind of champion that could make up for this kind of issue. But once you tunnel yourself into something like this, you are just opening yourself up to a ban or to a pick away eventually. So it depends. It's kind of like with Schalke, where they ended up playing like a lot around Nuke Duck. That you maybe have the option to do this, but there were very few champions that they could do that on eventually anyway. I hope it works out for Febiven because he's just such a fucking phenomenal mid laner.
What's your prediction?
And they will have all the tools to do it.
Wait,
Whoa.
Doran disconnected. Oh, there he is.
They have all the tools to do it, but you have to remember that these guys had 3 winning lanes last season, all season. So even if we take it as everything is winning, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to know what to do with it, and I don't see them adding the ability to know what to do with it with the changes that they have made.
Wait, isn't
outside
Soaz,
of potentially Soaz?
Yeah, isn't that why they added Soaz and why they added Gurla? Because these
are
but
Soaz,
good team players, good macro players.
Soaz is really good. Soaz is really good at doing this. Well, I mean, Max was a really strong macro player as well. But the thing with Soaz is that Soaz has shown to be able to do this when he's on champions like Narn, when he's on champions like Jarvan, and otherwise we've seen him do his absolute best, but it doesn't necessarily translate into a win. So there's a very thin meta where he's going to be able to do it. And that meta might not even present itself. These picks might not even present themselves. He's probably the best split pusher in the league when it comes to how he intelligently plays the map in that scenario. Obviously, there are better mechanical players like Wonder, but this is a very pigeonholed area in which he could potentially carry him.
Okay. Well, one last before I ask you about prediction about Misfits. Bringing on players like Soaz, bring on players like Gurla, who's been part of multiple successful rosters like Soaz with multiple versions of Fnatic, Gurla with Rox Tigers, Longzhu. These players like develop systems. These players see how coaching staff work. These players have been in discussions with good junglers like that engage well, good top laners that engage well, and good supports that engage well. And one really good thing you get out of getting all these veteran players is like they're like a fountain of knowledge, and like you can talk to them and they can also teach the players around them. Don't you think just by purely bringing over players like Soaz and Gurla, like they can teach and help Maxlore and also help each other and make the team more well-rounded and kind of the problems that you're discussing?
Depends on how receptive players are. Like, this is the super team fallacy, you know? Like, you would imagine that all of these really strong players coming from really strong teams with really strong histories would therefore be able to share knowledge, and it just doesn't actually work out like that in the vast majority of scenarios.
Yeah, when the players are egotistical, but I don't think Soaz and Gurla are actually opposite of that. You commended Soaz for being such a good team player and being great outside of the game in terms of like the team environment and being able to help other people. Gurla's the exact like copy of that. Gurla's very friendly, Gurla's very knowledgeable, Gurla teaches well.
Yeah, I think Gorilla has... So I think Gorilla has gaps in his knowledge that would need to be fixed as well, but you also now need to think about Maxlore, Febiven, and Hans Sama and how they will react to it. So it entirely depends on how they react to that stuff, and history has taught us that it's less likely that they're going to be able to react to it well, as opposed to rookies who don't necessarily have this high opinion of themselves from a ridiculously strong past. I do think Hans Sama is the kind of guy that learns really well, but he's not going to immediately suddenly become like a really vocal player in game or anything like this. I do question how the communication is going to happen, but I don't know how good Gorilla's English is, or maybe Hans Sama's Korean. I know he's like a weeaboo though, so maybe he has experience in Asian dialects or something.
Gorilla will.
I have no idea. But
Gorilla will learn English, but I think communication in League of Legends isn't necessarily about how much English you know or how much of a certain language you know. It's how willing you are to be vocal. Even with like a very small vocabulary, like you can communicate really well in League of Legends. And Gerla, I guarantee, will be very, very vocal and is very willing to communicate. Where do you place this Misfits roster then? Like,
I mean, he basically just said earlier, like he didn't see them as the best team, but he thinks they'll get to Worlds.
No, he said they might not get to Worlds.
Four. Yeah, top three, top four, and it depends on whether Origin works out or not. If they get it, obviously I'm leaving out Schalke, and there's probably a lot of people who are like, Schalke's gonna win everything. But like for me, these are like the top three, top four. These are the competing for Worlds rosters that we have.
Okay.
Would you put Fnatic? What about this though? Sorry. Would you put Fnatic and G2 at top 1, top 2, or would you also
basically just said that already? Yeah.
Lump them in that group.
Origin and Misfits are competing for a spot. G2, Fnatic lock.
Okay.
It's you can take that as a prediction if you want. It's just how it looks on the outset. Things will always change.
Sure. Okay, so one team that didn't make a lot of changes is obviously Vitality, where they just changed the jungler. They brought in Mowgli, the former Afrika Freaks jungler. What do you think of this move? Like, should they have made more wholesale changes? I mean, Vitality is an org that in theory has funding, has investment. You know, this is a team that could have done so, but they've stuck with basically a similar lineup to last year. Correct move?
So Vitality and Splice are actually two teams that are like maybe in summer they end up powering through or something. It's difficult to say if Vitality made the right move or not. I'm really curious what the issue with Kickers was, where they felt that they needed to take Mowgli in. I'm really curious, but I also know that they scrimmed a lot with Mowgli's former team before the summer split last year, so maybe they just saw something really big in Mowgli. I can't speak too much to Mowgli's performance. I can't even speak to Mowgli's English. But just from the outset, I don't think it was necessary to boot Kikis. So there must have been something internal going on.
So
it's really confusing to me.
Wouldn't it be something similar to you said regarding Amazing, where like it would be like speculation, but Amazing and Kikis both bring a system, and once you have the system and you learn the system, you feel like, okay, we already have the system down. We can just upgrade to a better mechanical player, and we'll upgrade overall as a team. They brought the system. Now we kept the system, and all we need to do is upgrade. Wouldn't that be like?
Do they know Mowgli does this though? Because like, there's a very specific environment that you are encountered with in Europe, and even if they were scrimming with the Korean team there, they might not necessarily even know what on earth's going on. Everything's happening in a completely different language. Like, maybe they do assume this. I wouldn't necessarily bet on that. I think the roster was fine as it was, and the reason that I don't put them as an instant top 3, top 4 contender is because I have a lot of question marks about this change. I don't understand what went wrong there, and also these guys are dropping junglers a lot, and we know that the Gilius one at least happened due to some internal stuff. So maybe there is like a team environment here that's not very good for junglers, yet they need the kind of jungler that Amazing and Kickers is. So there's some weird dynamic thing going on there, and I don't know enough about it to comment on it. It just seems unnecessary from my point of view. This is a spot that Amazing could have gotten if you really needed to replace Kickers and just bring on somebody else. But no offense, Amazing, but Kickers is the kind of player I'd imagine would end up replacing Amazing. So.
What about the angle of them just holding with so many players from last year, though? Like, I realize why the org might do that thing of like, well, we made Worlds, so if we just use our experience and learn from that, you know, next year we move up another spot. But like, when you look at all the moves in the off season and some of the big name players that were available, it's kind of underwhelming not to see any potential upgrades or a big signing here. What expectations should you have for this squad? Like, should they have been a team that was in the mix to get a bigger name?
Maybe in the support, just upgrade to Vander, since Vander not getting a team was really kind of strange. And if there was anywhere that I would imagine you'd want a bigger name for, that you would want a better player for, it would probably be in the support department. He has some phenomenal games on Fresh, but remove the Fresh and he's a bit of a different player. It's also on Leona. Basically he has Ignore syndrome. But you don't even necessarily need to do that anyway, since that bot lane functioned really well as a bot lane regardless. But if you'd made any changes, I would have assumed it would have been support. I would keep Jizuke, I would keep I have to call him Attila now, but I still prefer the name Mini Trupax. and I would keep Cabochard. I don't know what happened to Cabochard's reputation, but a lot of people suddenly decided that Cabochard was a bad player, and I thought he had a phenomenal Worlds Group stage. I thought he played really well in the Worlds Group stage, and like he was absolutely dunking on Cuvée in some of the games. So I don't understand where this came from. This doesn't seem like a roster that I would want to make many changes with. I do agree with, for example, SKT kept rotating in new tops and junglers and new players in every role, but SKT didn't necessarily immediately fire their player. Their top laners mostly ended up leaving to North America or China a lot, but SKT would always grab like a substitute player, have them in-house, and if you suddenly were getting too comfortable because of how well you did last split, like maybe some of these players were doing, maybe Kickers was doing that, who knows, you just turned around and you saw this guy ready to replace you if you got lazy, and that works really well as a motivating factor, but I wouldn't necessarily see a reason to immediately replace any of these players due to performance. Just maybe there are some supports that can have a wider champion variety than Jackstraw. Wider effective champion variety than Kickers, certainly not being one of them.
Right. One of the things I found interesting was earlier when you alluded to the idea that people were really hyped about the Schalke lineup. Why is that then? Because this is a lineup of players where beyond Ignar, who obviously had that whole hype from Misfits, and that's over a year ago now, you know, most of these players aren't the ones that either had a great year or people see as like big names. I mean, for example, obviously like Upset was on a good team, but he was still a young player. Memento, most people didn't give a fuck about Roccat anyway. Odoamne, Splice didn't really seem to use him very well, you know. Like, why are you someone who agrees with the sentiment that Schalke should be a strong team?
The problem with Schalke, as I see it, is that they have multiple players on there that aren't. God, I really don't want to flame these guys, but I think they're going to end up directionless in mid to late game again. I think that Memento really does fall off once you hit mid to late game, and I think Upset has an idea in his head of what to do. But he's not necessarily the best at communicating it. And he does have what I like to call Sven syndrome, which is he over-prioritizes mid-lane priority at a point. And that can be quite damaging sometimes. And I think whereas Odoamne does talk a lot, it's not necessarily always the most streamlined or useful information once you hit that stage. And I think they might end up with this issue that they actually had in last year's roster. And also, the pairing of Ignar and Upset's really quite strange to me, because Ignar is very much the I need to go kind of support player, whereas Upset has always, at least when I was working with him, and from what I could see last year, always tended towards these more reserved laning phases and these more reserved laning champions. Even if they were lane bullies, he wouldn't necessarily be playing to like permanently dive or at all the kind of playstyle that Ignar really synergizes well with. So whereas both these players are really good, and I think Upset has the potential to be one of the best AD carries in Europe, as a bot lane, it seems kind of mismatched to me. And I'm not sure if maybe Ignar, because I haven't worked with Ignar, maybe Ignar is the kind of guy that will plug this mid to late game hole. Maybe you've talked to Ignar, Loco?
And Ignar gives a team direction, and he likes shot calling. But I'm not an expert. I've talked to him a little. I talked to his teammates a little. I don't have a complete picture.
But shot calling at which stage of the game is a pretty big thing, because with the Misfits roster that Ignar was on, this was also the same part of the game where they suddenly weren't as dominant. This has always been a Misfits problem, by the way. They've never managed to find players who are really strong at this particular stage of the game. They found players that were really strong early and early to mid, and early to mid is especially where Ignar shined on his champ pool at the time, where if you got the Alistar, if you got the Leona, obviously this guy could only really play engaged champs, but early to mid game, basically nowhere on the map was safe if you were playing against Ignar. But when it came to mid to late, they couldn't quite close out the SKT series, for example, and there were multiple instances in the LCS where they couldn't quite close out at this point. And this obviously continued without Ignar, but Mikyx is not a player who takes over at this point either. So I don't see, unless you're able to tell me confidently otherwise, but obviously you haven't worked with Ignar yet. I don't see this direction coming in mid to late game, and this is my biggest issue with it, because Odoamne has shown to be a really, really strong top laner. He didn't have such a good split last year, but the way that Splice used jungle was quite questionable and really not a way for a player like Odoamne to shine. Abbedagge is a bit of a question mark when it comes to the stronger mids. I do think he'll be able to hold his own against all mids, though. But again, I think Humanoid is the strongest of the rookie mid laners, and the bot lane is a little bit mismatched. But say that all of these lanes were definitely winning, I still don't see how they're going to close out games on a consistent basis. So, but we're not even talking from that point if we actually look down the entire roster.
Can I ask a little bit about Upset? So,
Sure.
when I was doing roster speculation, a lot of TSM people ended up following Upset, and a lot of people in the chat were telling me, "Oh, Upset's one of the best European AD carries, one of the best European AD carries." And from your description of Upset, it looks like he's Zven light. So, could you, like fill us on?
I mean, there's Sven light, but that doesn't necessarily make him like just a categorically worse version of Sven. It just puts him on the same like kind of player, style of player, I guess you could say, as Sven. And Sven syndrome wasn't a thing that he was doing excessively in the summer split last year, for example. Like, he definitely calmed down on that. But the thing with Upset is that a lot of Upset's flaws that he's worked on have been worked on in the same way. He's just kind of calmed down. He hasn't become this aggressive 1v9 carry player. He has been the consistent DPS kind of player. And that's the kind of player he wants to be, and that kind of player is really, really useful as an AD carry, but it's not the kind of player that a player like Ignar wants to work with. It's not the kind of player that's going to enable a player like Ignar, so I still find it a bit of a mismatched thing. I do still think he's a phenomenal AD carry. I think he understands laning phase really well, and I think he's mechanically really talented. He obviously has shown at least one issue when it comes to adaptation. This guy was not able to play any of the AP champions that came out into the bot lane. Luckily, I know his Victor is actually really good. So if that's going to become as common as we've seen in the Kessler Cup, then he's at least Gucci for one. But outside of that, you can call him Sven Light. I think Sven has fallen on hard times as well recently. I think Sven's still a really, really strong player, and I think Upset's a really, really strong player. I just used the Sven analogy to show where he is similar to Sven in terms of playstyle, and even in terms of one specific weakness. But that's not meant to be a slight on him by any means. He's very strong. He's a top 5 minimum, sometimes top 3.
Okay. Better or worse than Reckless? Because that gives me kind of like
Reckless is the best, so...
So, okay, 3rd or 5th. That's still like a good benchmark to go off of.
Until Forgiven comes back, and shows him who's really boss. The Greek is coming back in summer, guys. So.
Well, speaking a little bit of Forgiven, because we also have Doran here. Do you think if he comes back, like, what level will he be at, and does he still want to play? Do you think he will actually?
I don't know how many times you'll need to see people like Soaz, Forgiven, Froggen. These people can literally play whenever they want to play League of Legends. Like, it's up to them. Like, I can literally tell you, it's no exaggeration. Any time in their careers when they were playing badly, that's where, like, I'll go ahead and give you the inside scoop. That's when they had the girlfriend that was fucking with them. That's when they had some shit going on in their real life that you'll never find out about, because it's not NA, so it's not all over every stream. Like, these are people where, like, their raw talent level for playing the game is so ridiculous, and crucially, they know their own game inside out. That's why they can always get back to a good level if they come back again. So I don't know whether Forgiven could be the best. That's probably a really tough one, because he'd have to fully immerse himself in the game. You'd have to find the right team. You'd have to start having a team built around him. All the things that make you a top player. But again, just like those other names, if he fully commits to coming back, and he's not just coming back just to dick around, I would go ahead and assume he'll become one of the best players.
Yeah, fully agreed with everything he just said. I would just add more names onto that list, like Featherman, for example. I think legitimately, when he wants to be good at the game, he will just come back and be good at the game. Like that's it. It's as simple as that with a lot of players, and Forgiven's absolutely one of them, for sure.
I don't have much experience with Forgiven, so it's hard for me to have an opinion. There are definitely generational level talent players where they can stop and come back and still be extremely good. AD carry also as a role hasn't changed that much, other than being forced to play non-AD carry roles. So I guess if I had to make a bet, I would also make a bet he would be decent if he did came back and he was fully committed. It's just, it takes generational level of talent to be able to stop playing the game. Game changes over time for like what 2 years it's been since Forgiven has played competitive and come back and compete at a top level. What are the teams we haven't covered yet? I guess like the newer teams.
Splyce.
There's a few. Basically, we've been going down by like order of importance. So yeah, Splyce is the next obvious stop because they do have some names that people will know. But if we put together some of the things veterans implied already, so sounding like he wasn't a huge fan of Zichachi when he was on Schalke, something was a bit limited. Xerxes is the very same jungler that he referred to in terms of being a very limited player in terms of how Splyce used him last year. Humanoid, he hyped up, said he thought he was going to be one of the better mid laners. Norscarin, he's already hyped as a support. Kobe was the guy who long ago was in the old Spice. So putting that all together, it sounds like this is a mid-table team.
This is a mid-table team minimum. This is the X factor though, and it's really interesting because Splyce were also an X factor last year and actually won a bet with 3 of my players and 1 member of staff to the tune of initially €100, but then when Splyce were doing really badly, they all made the horrible decision to up it to almost €200 each. That Splyce would end up top 3 at the end of Spring Split, and they actually did end up top 3 at the end of Spring Split. But this time, I'm less confident in giving that immediate assertion. I would be willing to say that this team is top 4 in summer. Minimum. I think the spicy thing would be to say that this team actually does make it to the World Championships in summer. The issue with Splyce is the way that they worked last year. This is the big X factor, and I like to believe that it's out of necessity. I've talked to Peter a bit about this, but it's like this is obviously like a really awkward thing to talk about specifically anyway with a coach like that. But if what happened last year, the way that they used Xerxes came out of necessity, and the way they played out the early game came out of like a necessity, the upgrades that they have absolutely help them play the way that you should be playing. And we've seen how Xerxes plays on Unicorns of Love if he's actually given the options to play early game, not out from a defensive structure. So Norscarin coming in to replace Kasing. There was a meme recently when LS was like flaming Kasing, but I don't actually think Kasing's laning phase is very good. And I think whereas this guy picks a lot of champions, there's a huge difference between picking a lot of champions and actually having a really diverse champ pool. I think Norscarin's absolutely an upgrade here. I think Norscarin's one of the most phenomenal support talents Europe's produced since Mickey X. And I think Norscarin is a talent who could end up competing with him for that. I know that Kobe is a bit more vocal. And this is the bigger issue, is that Norscarin's not going to be as vocal as players like Kasing were, and players like Kasing are famous for being. And Kobe is a little bit more of an X factor in this regard. If he can step up to the plate and be vocal there, and if he can step up to the plate and give more good level performances like he did on, for example, Vayne and on a couple of Caitlyn games and this kind of ilk, then that bot lane is automatically really strong, which is a far cry from what they were last year. When it comes to mid lane, I think Humanoid is the best of the 3 rookies. I think that was a really strong pickup. It might just take him a bit of time to get into the swing of things because the communication system he's going to be dealing with here is going to be vastly different from before. He has Xerxes. Xerxes is really communicative, but maybe he might necessarily have to hit his stride when it comes to a less defensive way to think about the early game, given how he was playing last year. So I actually have to talk a bit about this Humanoid Nemesis Abbedagge thing, because Abbedagge hit rank 1 recently, and Nemesis, everyone knows, just won EU Masters. And if you rewind the clock like a year ago, I would say Nemesis was the best out of these 3. But Humanoid basically went from being a Azir 2 trick to developing phenomenally when it comes to his champion pool. And I've seen this guy work with a wide variety of teams that all have kind of different communication styles. And his champ pool is much wider than what Nemesis is right now when it comes to like an absolutely top level champion pool. I actually have really, really strong feelings about how Humanoid is going to perform against not just these rookie players, but I think he's going to be the one that looks like the breakout like Jizuki was, for example, last year. Like, I think if any of these 3 guys end up suddenly hitting the ground running and showing really strong performances, Humanoid is your guy. Okay. For sure.
Can I ask about Magic Felix as a 4th on the 3 rookies? Like, where does Magic Felix fit in?
Problem with Magic Felix is he's 24 years old and he has a reputation for choking at LAN events. I actually personally would be willing to take a bet on Magic Felix right now. But this idea that he chokes at LAN events is not just because like there were bad performances from his team or something like this. I don't know if either of you two have ever watched ESL Meisterschaft, but
No,
I'm gonna assume some people in the chat. ESL Meisterschaft is a German league. I'm gonna assume some people in the chat have, but they literally used to have at their LAN events heart monitors strapped to the players. So we have medical proof that MagiFelix, when it comes to stage games, suddenly starts choking his heart out. But this was a couple of years ago. The problem is that he didn't do himself any favors in Turkey recently, when he was playing in the relegations there.
Can I ask one thing regarding like the heart rate stuff? So the other players also had heart rate stuff, right? Were they also
everyone had heart rate stuff.
Were they just as high, or was he just exceptionally high?
No. Well, there was one. Okay, that's actually really funny because there are. Do I say this? Yeah, fuck it, I say it. So I worked with an AD carry called Cedrian before. He actually ended up on like Red Bull, and now I'm actually not quite sure where Cedrian is. But I also remember how he could be if like his teammates weren't performing exceptionally or anything, and whenever his support went for an engage, the guy's heart rate like spikes, and I was like, I know what you're worried about coming, mate. But yeah, I loved watching all of this stuff with the heart rate and stuff. MagiFelix's was like absurdly high compared to, for example, Pretty. Like I think Pretty would also be a solid bet if you were looking for like a rookie mid laner right now. I actually think MagiFelix is potentially getting over this whole thing. I think his whole exposure recently has been really good for him, and now that the infrastructure is in place to bring in sports psychologists, I think you can look to try to combat this sort of thing. As it is, it's really understandable why teams aren't taking a chance on MagiFelix. The age does matter, because you do end up setting your ways at a point as a player. At the very least, all these orgs will have seen their 23, 22, 24, 25-year-old players end up pretty set in their ways and not as receptive as a straight-up pre-20-year-old, pre-22-year-old rookie would be, and they'd be thinking, okay, we can fix this guy's flaws. They're less likely to think that about you the older you are, and I understand why from experience organizations would think this. If the article saying that MagiFelix potentially gets the Acad spot at Fnatic is true, then they could be looking to do what they did with like Whooper and Sirs with MagiFelix and Nemesis, and like see if it can work out. We can see if it can work out, and it might not necessarily work out, but we're not spending too much on it. And I hope they do give him that chance, because I'm really rooting for him.
Okay, so
but it is understandable why he's not there.
So Chad is saying MagiFelix is 18. I'm not saying Chad is right, but why do people think he's 18? Like if he's actually
I have
24?
no idea why people think he's 18.
Okay.
I've absolutely no idea.
He's been playing solo queue for like a long while, and like I've heard the name.
He's been playing in National League for a long while as well.
So he's 24, not 18.
I have no idea where people's getting this.
Okay.
It's almost like people are full of shit and don't want to talk about local.
So the top lane thing with Vizicachi on the Splyce roster, getting back to the Splyce roster itself, yeah, I have issues with his trading pads, and I don't necessarily think he's the absolute strongest top laner there. Odoamne wasn't having a very good split either, though, and I think Vizicachi at least found really good, viable ways that he could impact his team. But this is like the big question mark, is how top lane's going to impact this, and then if Humanoid can hit the ground running, that doesn't necessarily become an issue, but you are still betting on a rookie, so that can still go either way, even though Humanoid is the rookie that I'd bet on if I was betting on any of these mid laners right now, or betting on any of the mid laners that are actually in the LEC. I'm going to say I'd actually bet on Leader out of all the rookie mids right now.
So if you got to make a team, you would not take Humanoid, Abbedagge, Nemesis, you would take this Leader.
Leader would be higher up in my priority list than all of them, yeah.
Okay.
Leader would be higher up on my priorities. Misfits have nabbed him.
Can you explain us a little bit about?
But yeah.
Yeah. Can you? Yeah.
Leader's champ pool is expanded from like.
Well, who he is, like, because to a lot of people he's just a name. Like Leader, you might like to a lot of people you could have just made up a name and like that would have been a player. So like.
Yeah, Leader has. Okay, so I'm pretty sure people know who Leader is. That video came out of LS Flaming. But Leader is quite toxic sometimes. Okay, so I first knew about Leader just over a year ago, and I tried to get him as a sub in HGK a few times, and he may not have passed the behavior checks. Who knows really, and who can really say? But the thing with Leader is Leader began as like this Yasuo-wise two trick, and he's expanded from that in the space of like a year into having one of the most deep champion pools of any of these mid laners. It got to the point where he debuted in Misfits Academy because because Special was like ill or something like this, and by the end of that week, people were literally leveraging 5 bans on Leader, because Leader was just hard carrying on all of these, and he still got champions he was comfortable with and that were meta and still hard 1v9ing. Kind of says a lot that he still had to be 1v9ing, even if 5 mid lane bans were leveraged on him, but still. The thing with Leader that has differentiated him from every other player is that his approach to his development has basically being one of absolute pure confidence with no split decisions whatsoever. Something my dad told me when I was like 5 or 6 that has always stuck with me is that every decision is a good decision so long as you commit. And the reasoning behind that is that if it's the wrong decision, you will learn something. But if you half-ass it, and you make a split decision here, you can't say for sure which decision was the right one, and you still might be wrong on what you learn from that. But players like Leader, and this is also how Broken Blade was developing so well, by the way, when they decide to go and roam for like a top dive, they're going to go and roam for the top dive, and it might look pretty fucking int at that point, but at least they will have a much better structure of which to learn from that. And this is also why players like Caps look really int sometimes in solo queue, because they don't make split decisions, and this really helps them develop as players. Leader was a player like that immediately from the moment that I saw him play, and from conversations with him that I had way back then as well. And as a result of that, he ended up developing his champion pool much faster than most other players who hit high elo and are just 2 tricks. And he's the player that I would bet on being a tier 1 mid laner in like a year's time. I think in a year's time, people will be saying that Leader is a tier 1 mid laner. And I think the reputation he got from the LS video was mitigated somewhat by LS actually doing VOD review of Leader on stream and realizing he is mechanically really proficient. LS obviously couldn't say that he is competitively going to play the lane out properly, because Leader recognized when there were abusable moments versus the players he was playing against and adapted his playstyle differently. I have personally seen how he can actually play out the lane properly, and I actually fully believe in him to be a tier 1 mid laner in a year's time. There isn't that much information about him right now. This is one of those examples of players that other players wouldn't necessarily bring up, because their first impression of who is going to be, this guy's a toxic arsehole, and they're going to be skewed against them in that regard. And with promotion system not being viable anymore, Leader can't just 1v9 through Challengers series and make it in. But because of his stint on Misfits Academy, I'm glad that he's going to continue getting chances, and I think this is a mid laner I'm really heavily promoting, because I really believe that he does deserve a shot.
If you give odds, any chance you start in summer, like 1 to 10, 1 to 20, 1 to 100.
I mean, I think he should, but it's really like the problem is now to say that he will be there in summer isn't the same as before. If Challenger Series is still a thing and you could just promote at the end of spring split, I'd say 100% Leader makes it in. Doesn't matter who he's playing against, he'll actually be able to 1v9. But in terms of whether these teams will decide to start him in summer, I have no idea about that.
Any of the 10
and if he ends up on Misfits again, because he was on Misfits Academy, if he ends up on Misfits again, he treated like a rabbit or some shit, then starting over Febiven, obviously no offense to Leader, I don't see why they would necessarily want to start him over Febiven.
Even if they don't start him over Febiven, like if he does that well in Academy or National Leagues in Europe, like other teams could pick him up.
I mean, SK Gaming might look to pick him up. Like they grabbed Pyrion, for example. What happens with... Okay, so obviously some people are going to say that if you're looking at a weaker mid laner, you're looking at Senkux. I actually think Senkux has displayed that he can actually play laning phase up quite well, and he can actually adapt his champ pool. So it depends on what version of Senkux we end up with. But Rogue also have Larson on their database, so like they're already preparing for that. So it's difficult to see where he would end up. Maybe if like Abadage fails entirely or something like this. Maybe if Humanoid fails, hell, maybe even if Nemesis fails, maybe he looks to pick up there. I think he should already be starting though. I think if I had to bet on a team that would offer him, it would probably be SK Gaming.
Is he one last thing. Is he that good? Is he someone like NALCS teams should look at? Because
he just literally said that the guy could 1v9 any challenger thing, no matter what the opponent or what his team was.
Yeah, he's a higher caliber than that. He's a higher caliber than challenger. He should be in the LEC. And I think in a year's time he'll be a tier 1 mid laner. So I think in a year's time NA teams will start being like, wait a minute. Okay, Broken Blade worked out. Why not?
I'll take a closer look.
Loco's that guy where the girl's like, do you want to come up for coffee? And he's like, I think there's a chance. It's like, fucking hell.
Oh my God.
Can't read any of the subtext, can he? There's only 3 teams left to do. Yeah, go on.
It just hit me that I just talked about Season 10. I don't know why that just hit me like it did, but it just hit me that I'm talking Leader will be a tier 1 in Season 10 and that we're actually about to hit 10 seasons. I don't know why that seems like a big thing for me, but there you go. Continue.
I mean, people are mentioning like the age thing a lot for Magic Felix, like him being 24 or him being 18, whatever. Like, do you think age has a lot to do with like player stubbornness? Like, because me and Dorian talked about it before, like in traditional
I personally would take the bet on him because I don't think that matters too much. But I would be willing to take the bet. C4 did the squinty eyes because yes, clearly there are older players who have now been able to develop egos and stuff like this. But I think when it comes to like a rookie player like Magic Felix, who is still a rookie despite his age, I don't think he will necessarily have developed, and I would take the opportunity. But I do understand why orgs would look at older players and think we don't want to take the opportunity. That's all I'm saying. I'm not endorsing that mindset.
I don't think that age is even that old, though. Like, here's the thing. If you're like 27
You're from Counter-Strike, though. You're from Counter-Strike.
No, but look outside of Counter-Strike. Yeah, look outside of Counter-Strike.
This is my point. In Counter-Strike, if you're 27 years old and you're a rookie, I'd say you're too old. But that's also because what are the odds that you're going to keep playing till you're like 33 or something? So, you know, is it even worth investing in a guy like that? I agree with you. For me, I think there's 2 types of age. There's how old you are in the game as a pro. So if he's 0 in that sense, if he does well in his first year, treat him as if he's 18-year-old rookie. You know, I think there's like, it's not a linear thing. Like, you don't, someone who's 26 and never played as a pro doesn't know any of the things that a 26-year-old pro does who played 6 years, obviously. So I don't think that's that big a deal on that one. It's more about how good the player is. Right, there's only a few teams left to go through. So since you talked about one of them already was Rogue, right? Rogue as a squad is obviously one of the newer organizations and basically just picked up leftovers plus a couple of people from Roccat and obviously even some of the staff from Roccat. So you actually have any hopes for this squad? I mean, you've already kind of curbed the Senkox hate, so it's not as bad initially as people already think.
We've basically gone down all of the teams that I think are able to compete for like a top 4 spot, maybe compete for a world spot. So obviously now we're talking about mid to lower tier teams. And yes, these guys are one of them. I feel really bad for almost every player on this roster actually, because like I think Kikis didn't deserve what happened to him. I think Senkox doesn't deserve any of the blame that happened to him. Profit's a big question mark for me because you had talents like Arome and Yoppa that were coming in, but again, as I've talked about before, teams are prioritizing brand names at this point. And then when it comes to the bot lane, it's Hiku and what's the support again? Wadid. Oh yes, we've already talked about this. Yeah, okay. There are. I don't understand why Neon's not in the LEC.
Who?
And this is one of the spots that I think Neon could take. Neon. Okay, so you.
Yeah.
So Neon subbed in for Unicorns and replaced Samux for a while, and he actually has some really strong performances. But I think that the big 4 names. Oh, we'll stick with 3. The big 3 names coming out of National League scene that should have been looked at were Crowny, renamed to Crownshot, Jeskler, who's on Excel, and Neon. And I think that this is where Neon should have ended up going. I thought that his performances on Unicorns would have proven that he's actually a viable AD carry in the LEC, even if Unicorns weren't in such a hot spot, he really helped them out. And I think this is a spot that Neon probably should have ended up taking. I don't really think Hiku has ever looked that strong of an AD carry, and I know he has his fans, but I don't see it. I think that you absolutely could have taken the rookie over Hiku here, and I've already said my piece on Wadid. People are way less likely to go for supports in Europe, though, in much the same way that EU mids is like a meme that you can basically make a brand on now. You can take in a rookie mid and people will get hype in Europe now for it, right? In much sports, and I think this is like a Western thing in general, are really looked down upon as a role, and I think this really hurt quite a few people this year, because I think Labrov, Bravado, these two guys were coming of age, and I think that they're actually the future of support in the LCS, and I would have liked to have seen teams to take bigger chances on them. But you also have players like Prime, you have players like Homie, you have players like this that are also coming up that I think are going to be hurt by this mentality in the long run, because they're not going to be able to prove themselves. And the reason that particularly the two I mentioned weren't able to prove themselves before is because they literally just weren't of age. And they came of age this year, but yeah.
Moving on to SK Gaming, like, what the fuck happened to SK Gaming as a name? Because I'm a long-term, like, my original, like, big game after StarCraft was Dota, and, like, SK Gaming was famous in Dota. Like, SK Gaming was originally, like, part of, like, the European LCS. Like, they've been a household name in Europe and in the overall gaming community across multiple games as, like, a top org. Like, after they got relegated, they just disappeared from LCS. Like, they lost their CSGO team, the Brazilian CSGO team. Like, it just feels like they've been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. I guess it's more of a question for Doran. Like, what the fuck is going on with, like, SK Gaming? And they ended up with kind of a mediocre roster. Like, so yeah, I'm kind of curious from, like, a overhead perspective. Yeah, what's going on with SK Gaming?
Okay. I mean, from my perspective, like, I would just say this is, if, like, first of all, even when they had the LCS team before, so obviously the famous team with Forgiven, and then Rated was like the captain of the team, and then obviously Forgiven leaving was when they had the split where they got relegated and they did really, really badly, right? When they, even around this point in time, people don't. I actually did a video on this topic, which was about the fact that, like, SK actually caught fucking lightning in a bottle with that core of that team, because if you remember the lineup they had when all the big names left, Ocelot obviously went off and made Gamers 2, and then like the other players all left, Kevin left, Nif left, everyone left the team and went off for season 4, and that was when SK got all these players that at the time were like just budget players, like Unrated had nowhere to play, no one gave a fuck about Candy Pandy, he was an old school player. So obviously someone like Freddy122 wasn't actually a big name back then. He just played for the Seoul Authority team, was an okay player. Svenskeren admittedly at least had some talent, but been out of the scene for a while. They got this lineup where on paper it was all just leftover players and no one expected anything from them. And they just got super lucky that lineup ended up becoming like pretty good. And then they parlayed that into getting into Forgiven into the lineup, became pretty good for a while. But the point I'm making is they already weren't one of the teams spending the most at that point in time. They already were a team that had actually, in terms of where they should have been like middle to bottom part of the table. So if anything, they survived a long time then. And I know within the org that they were an org that actually believed that League of Legends was a bubble, and that the salaries going up and up and up never would make sense. And at the time, admittedly, we're talking like 3 years ago now, at the time, there wasn't a clear vision in Europe for what would the point of paying top salaries and having the best team be. Like, how do you ever transition that to making money? Like, they were from the mindset of, like, it's a business. I'm running it as a business, so one day I'm going to make money off these guys. Skipping forwards ahead in time, in CSGO, it also was not an org that was relevant whatsoever. They used to, again, have a very cheap budget org. They had a Danish org of players who most of you, even CSGO fans, won't remember some of these names. There weren't very many good players on the team. One of the only memorable ones was a player called Config, who now plays for Optic, but this is before he became a very good player. What happened was, though, there came a point in time where they were able to, this is behind the scenes information, get loads and loads of investment money. And that then allowed them to get the Brazilian team from, at the time, Luminosity, who were the major champions. So their big pivot in esports, at least from the games I follow, was taking on this investment and then using it to immediately like lure away one of the biggest teams in the world. It's actually the #1 ranked team. And then obviously for a couple of years, let's say like a year and a half or so, they had this very good CSGO team. But as you've seen, they've even lost the CSGO team. They were trying to pivot to get another CSGO team from Brazil, but that whole thing fell apart because that team wasn't very good. And at the moment, they're not doing anything in CSGO. So actually, as an org, as far as I can tell, they had a period where they were just dropping off in relevance. Like, they weren't willing to like take the big gambles that everyone else did in esports and take on the investment. They eventually took on investment, but then haven't seemed committed to being the team like a G2 that will continue to spend all the time and keep re-upping every season. So I actually personally, when I looked at this team and the circumstances, like they got in right at the end of franchising. If you remember, it was teams like North were being originally reported. SK got in at the very end, and then you look at their lineup, they don't look like they've spent a big amount of money. It looks like they've just gotten whoever's available. So personally, I would guess, again, despite the history of the name, that it's not a team that's putting in big money. This isn't even a gamble. They haven't necessarily done a bad job with the lineup. They've just gotten whoever's available, and now they're just trying to get their foot in the door and maybe one day be a team again. Who knows at that point in time? So what do you think, that's true?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think they made a good decision by taking 3 aspects of a roster that had already been established, that had already worked well together. But yeah, it looks the same to me as well. They basically picked up whoever was left over. It's not the worst thing that they could have done with it, but obviously we're talking about them this far down, and I think everyone would agree this is a low tier team that could potentially have a mid tier high maybe, but things would have to happen that we literally don't know about at this point. I will have to say on individual level, Crownie is really strong. As an AD carry, out of the 3 rookies, I actually think he's stronger than Jeskla. This is an unpopular opinion because players like Upset, for example, have really shouted out Jeskla. Jeskla had some really, really strong performances on Movistar, but I think that Crownie does edge him out. I think Crownie's laning phase is better. And I think Self-Made Man is actually really intelligent about the jungle. It's difficult to say if him or Tinks is smarter, but I think Tinks is a lot more... a lot less wow, I can't even think of like the word to put for it, but I think you have more options with Self-Made Man on your team than you do with Tinks, basically.
That's versatile.
Yeah, he's more versatile. Thank you. It was on the tip of my tongue. I think Self-Made Man's more versatile than Tinks, who would be the other big rookie jungle talent that you could think of. Probably not Loco think of, but that Foreign might have been able to think of, probably heard coming around. Chat probably heard of him at least. I think the way Self-Made Man and Nemesis worked together was really strong. It was very much predicated on the fact that Nemesis played really strong pushing champions like Azir, like Corki, like Ryze, that could be played around really easily with a jungler. And Self-Made Man had a lot of pathing opportunities open to him because of this. And another big thing, though, is that they mostly played towards topside a lot. And I actually think that they benefit a lot from keeping the core essence of the side lanes. They've obviously added Dreams, but when it comes to the way that they were playing beforehand, I don't know if you guys... I doubt it. Twitch has probably watched Iberia Cup and saw them win the whole thing of Kanini as support, right? No offense, Kanini, but you hadn't worked with them for the entire time either. You had as a coach, but not as an actual support player. Their support for the majority of the time had been Falco, and they still were able to pull out the wins with them. With Kanini. So I think the shift in support doesn't necessarily change their style there. It just depends on whether or not they're actually going to be able to perform their win lane, win game function versus all the other teams here. And we've named some incredibly strong players in a lot of other roles. So this still looks like a mid to low tier team when I look at it. And I think that the mid laner will end up being replaced later on. I know a lot of people are going to defend Pyrion to high hell, but I just don't understand why he's here.
Wait. I heard so many good things regarding Pyrion from the Korean players I talked to, and even during the summer, like when he did, play over Faker, there was a lot of hate on him and there was a lot of underperformances, but Pyrion, like, ramping up and in solo queue, like, towards the offseason, I wasn't that surprised that he landed on a team. There was a potential that he would have even landed on an NA team. Why, like, I guess I'm curious why you're so down on Pyrion.
Because I think it's unnecessary, and I think, again, leader is out there. I think if you did a couple of seconds of, I mean, why would, okay, it really does boil down to why would you end up importing mid lane in Europe? There's even a goddamn meme about how successful European mids are. You can pick up basically any European mid at this point and at least be a mid tier, at least have them at a mid tier level. Every European mid laner is competitive. I guess we can talk about Exile a bit later, because Exile I also think could have been replaced by more versatile rookie mid laners that are up and coming. Like, honestly, you could take hat-tricks at this point. I would be down for taking Magic Felix at this point. I've already talked about leader, that's 3, and we're about to talk about potentially 2 mid laners that I think could have been replaced. Like, there's always going to be a surplus of mids in Europe, and it just seems very strange to me that you would import in that role. I understand why organizations look to import in the support role, because Dreams is technically an import, though Dreams was playing in the National League, but import as a whole just looks better to an organization by and large. I mean, you're from North America, you know this for a fact. You guys are always going to just assume the import is better than the North American player. For the support role, that's very much the same in Europe, so I can understand more from that perspective. I disagree with it fundamentally, but I can understand it more from Orc's perspective. I don't understand why Pyrion's there.
Okay, so it's more so not a diss on Pyrion, but there are just options in Europe, and you don't necessarily have to import.
Yeah. You say this on Pyrion, and I just immediately think of Malice apparently saying Pyrion, but with 09 instead of the IN at him in solo queue. So it's less of a diss on Pyrion, it's way more of a diss at the org. I have no idea how you could have run out. Like, actually, Broken Soul was saying to me on Twitter that like there are already 3 rookie mids in Europe. Not every org has to have rookie mids. You don't understand what the problem is. Like, just because there's 3 doesn't mean that there aren't literally 6 names available that you could be taking right now. Like, it makes no sense. You could also be taking Larson, though Larson has opted to go back to school. You could easily entice him with a better offer. Like, there are multiple mid laners that you can name that you could bet on before you'd have to import. This isn't a region that necessarily needs that. So.
Okay, so the last team to talk about is Excel, and anyone who saw the Narrative Wake episode we did about Academy, I had like a mini rant at the end of that, because for anyone who doesn't know, like in the context of what Loco asked about SK there, where okay, in esports history, SK Gaming obviously one of the first ever real teams, and was a team that managed to keep up pace over history. The reason why Excel is very unique in the teams that have been added to this franchising group is because of all the teams added here, they are the least established in any context that is meaningful for esports, as far as I can tell. Like, I only know Excel myself from being a very low-level organization in CSGO in the UK. Like, I even looked it up online. I couldn't find any big esports games in which they had, like, top players, as in esports I consider. Like, I don't know if they have a good FIFA player or some shit, you know, but, like, no esport I'm ever aware of being, like, relevant have they ever been a big org within. And so this one really looked like they were just like right at the end, whoever can just get the money, you know, first come, first serve. There you go. There's your spot, sir. Welcome to the franchising. Like, the idea that they had, like, you know, loads of people bidding for them just doesn't seem plausible from this one. Then I look at the lineup and it's like, fucking hell, they really just send out the call for whoever's left. Come on, veteran. What do you actually think of the team beyond the org element? Do they have decent players here?
Casual's really good. They keep bringing up Kasing as like the captain, but Casual's honestly going to be that when it comes to in-game. But the thing is, the team that is built around him looks kind of like how we were talking about SK in terms of they brought in who's left. Though you can see why they would bring in Kasing from like a brand perspective. They're really pushing this whole we're the UK organization thing. Sure. Yeah, see, so there's a big irony here for anyone who watched ESL UK Prem. So all like 80 of you, every time I went on that stream, it didn't have very many viewers. They were the organization in the UK that had an all-imported roster and not a single UK player on it, and they got a lot of flack from it. And now they're trying to put themselves out as the UK team, bringing in it's like all UK staff and UK support, UK jungler. Yeah, like it's really a bit hypocritical, but it is what it is. Kasing, again, I don't think is like the strongest laner, and I also think that they have communication sorted out with another role on there. So Kasing is not on the level of the other top tier supports in Europe, especially if you're bringing back players like Ignar, who are really good in one function, and Gorilla, who's really good in one function. I can't think of like a specific niche that I would really bring Kasing on for, you know? When it comes to Jeskler, Jeskler, again, one of the big 380 carries that you should be bringing in. I hope Kasing can help him with it, but I honestly think that Jeskler is better than Kasing in the laning phase already. I think Jeskler is not going to learn that much from Kasing. I think he's going to learn a lot about how to function within a team from Kasing outside of the team environment, but Jeskler was already on Movistar, so for you two, and for anyone in the chat who doesn't know, Movistar had Daylor, for example. These guys actually have a really strong functioning support staff that does enable you to know how to function a team properly. So I actually think Jester's going to benefit less from being on a team like this than he would from being on one of the top tier teams. I think he could have been looked at for a top tier team. When it comes to mid lane, so the thing with Exile is he's really strong on certain champs some of the time. So like his Ryze, for example, has some phenomenal games. His Yasuo was his bread and butter back in the day, but this guy has not expanded out of like a really stringent champion pool to a really expensive champion pool basically ever, like effective champion pool. And he has shown that he's not really capable of developing it right now. So I would have gone with one of these up and coming rookie talents over him, to be honest. And this is a guy that you can deal with in the ban phase. It's not good to have a guy that you can deal with in the ban phase. And then Expect is a really curious one. So there's a manner of thinking, and I know that some of the XL people were thinking this when they brought him on, where people think of Expect as like a tank player, and he's like a solid tank player, and you can then place a bot around it. But I remember Expect as a Rumble Renekton 2-trick, so it's really mind-boggling to me that people have this idea of Expect. And again, I think Arome, Yopper, Shemek, and even Ice Beasto could have been taken before you have to import in top in Europe. Those are my suggestions for who you would take over Profit as well, in terms of rookie talents.
Didn't G2 pick up Expect because they wanted a carry player top lane, and Kikis was their tank player?
Yeah.
So even someone that's not an expert on Europe knows like Expect wasn't picked up for those reasons.
This was not the rationale. I can tell you for a fact this was not the rationale to bring Expect on XO. It was the complete opposite. So it was really mind-boggling to me when I was told this. But it is what it is, and I do agree this is a team that you would ideally want to play to bot around, but if the bot lane doesn't work out so well, because the Kobe Kasing bot lane wasn't really working out so well in the laning phase either, there were some games where it did, there were some games where it wasn't, if it doesn't work out so much this time as well, then you do have the option to play to top, so it's not completely doomed. I don't think these guys will be last place, because I think Cagewell has a really strong grasp on how to play the map, in early, in mid, and in late, and that's a really difficult thing to find. Like Loco alluded to earlier, whereas you can teach people about the game, you can't teach someone to suddenly be vocal. You know, you either are a vocal person at this age or you aren't. You're not going to suddenly become some super confident alpha male on the field if you've never been that your entire life. That's the hardest thing to change about a person. So they do have a really strong core in that respect. I do worry about mid lane. I do worry about bot lane a bit. I do worry about how this will all end up coming together. But I don't think it's like the last place team. I think it's the 8th place team. Yeah, I'd say 8th, maybe 7th.
Okay.
So a little bit, I guess moving on from kind of Europe, one thing that's been a little bit conversational is Olympics might be involved in esports in the future, especially with League of Legends. We don't have to get into details regarding if League of Legends needs Olympics or if Olympics needs League of Legends, but one thing that gets consistently brought up is if you could only play by nationality, like Korean players on one team, Chinese players on one team, like do you think like a European team, like a Danish team or like a French team has any kind of shot at taking down a Korean team or a Chinese team?
I mean, the Koreans get to just make their all-star team for this World Championships, and Europe gets split up. Whereas North America, they only get split up twice. Europe gets split up like 8 times. And I still think majority of European teams would shit on American teams, so it's all Gucci. But
Danish team would be something like Wonder.
Yeah, I'm going down in my head because I
Caps or Bjerg or Caps are Jensen, Zben, and then support would be
Danish. There's a huge surplus when it comes to. Isn't Mickey X from Denmark? Well, I've got that wrong actually. I think.
Oh, he's from like Serbia or some shit, and he's some country like that.
Oh yes, no, you're
something
right.
Like that along those lines,
he's from like Estonia or something.
In your opinion, who would be the best nationality? Which would be the best European nationality, and where would you place them in the world? And I guess same question for
I have to go through the nationalities of every player in my head, so it's not an easy question to say. Like obviously, people will immediately say Denmark because you could grab like Sven, you could grab obviously Wonder, and you have your choice of mid laner that you guys have mostly imported. Now that I think about it, but you have a really strong top section already, and you have a really strong AD carry immediately if you just take Sven. So I would say that. I am also trying to think of who you would take for support, because I'm trying to think of a Danish support player.
Deathfees or Deficio or like or I don't know.
You have to be people who actually fucking play the games.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone beyond Deathfees.
I don't know the nationalities of every single European player off by heart. But I would assume that Denmark would be really up there. What's really interesting is that before Cagewell switched to jungle, actually, you could have quite confidently said that the UK would also have one of the stronger teams on the end by pure virtue of that. I can immediately think of a player in all of their roles. And also, like a year ago, Max Law was actually at a really strong peak level, and Alfari is British. So then you would have Cagewell, and you could have like Deadly Kasing, and that would actually be a pretty functioning roster. Whereas with a lot of regions, you'll have holes in certain was like, we can't think of a support player for Denmark right now. I can't think of one off of the top of my head. I wonder about Greece, actually, because Lavrov is Greek, Pretty is Greek, Forgiven is Greek. Top lane, they had a player, it was like Warrior Maiden or something like this. It was like Warrior Lady or something like this. They had a top laner who was actually quite good and that some people were looking at, but now I can't think of a jungler, so there's the hole.
French team.
Poland actually has a lot of really strong players. So you'd have Jankos, you'd have Vander, you'd have Woolite, you'd have...
Selfie, maybe?
There you go, Selfie. Sorry, Selfie, you changed your name like 5 times. You have Selfie, and then for top lane, you grab on Nice Beasto, and that's actually a strong team. So that's another reason where I can immediately think of players. But overall, yeah, obviously, none of these really compared to the names that you put on Denmark. And the thing is with Denmark, I already see a jungler who knows how to play around winning lanes, and potentially 3 winning lanes if we can conjure up a support. And I'm going to look this up, and I'm going to hit myself because I've forgotten a really obvious support. But I'd still kind of bet on the Denmark roster out of all of these. I would wish, if we did something like this, that you'd split up the US into states. But, you know, I'm confident that most of these rosters would beat out the United States anyway, especially since most of the NA's best resident players were Canadian, so it is what it is.
It'd be something like
local.
Yeah.
Haunter, Xmithie, Pobelter,
yes.
Doublelift, Afro, or
Doublelift's Canadian? I thought he was United States.
Yeah, no, it'd be Haunter, that's the US roster. Haunter, Dardocker, Xmithie, Pobelter, Doublelift, Afro. Canada would be something like Licorice. Who would be the jungle? Oh, holy shit! There's an obvious jungler that I'm missing.
I don't know why, but in my head, it was from the US.
Licorice, Licorice on the mid lane would be like Shifter or Tuesday or a Blaze Olive, Wild Turtle, Smoothie. That would be like Canada.
Smoothie and not Biofrost. There you go.
Or Smoothie or Biofrost, like either are.
I mean, I thought Smoothie was like the strongest support in North America when he was replaced on Cloud9. So I would agree with you of Smoothie.
Right, let's do the viewer questions because this thing's been going quite a while. So let's get it on.
It's time for Dorian to go to sleep. Any viewers on Twitch chat, ask actual legitimate questions, and we'll take your questions.
Okay. Do I have to be looking at Twitch chat?
No,
I'll find a question.
All right.
We'll do 2, so make them 2 good ones.
Okay.
Only 2.
Dorian, while I look for the viewer question, what do you think about like the concept of national, like during like an MSI timing or during like an all-star timing, like just the concept that we discussed?
Like, here's the thing, it might have like novelty and fun for one tournament, but the problem with that concept is like the main reason it would be garbage is because, for example, when China and Korea do it, every player that's doing that is an actual real player. They can take like existing synergies that already exist within teams and make a real squad, and they're all high-level players anyway. Even when we were making the Danish, like, we're already picking at least one player that doesn't even play in the LCS. So the problem is it wouldn't really work in any sense. If anything, it just shows how fucking bad NA is at bringing up NA talent. You guys can't even put together 5 players for one whole country. That you should have a mad advantage over everyone else in this particular tournament. And yet, as he just says there, I don't even know who the Danish support is, but I'm already taking Team Denmark to shit all over Team USA. So all that needs to be said, isn't it?
I mean, another big thing is this is literally just the All-Star tournament, but you've just nerfed Europe. Like, America doesn't change, China doesn't change, and Korea doesn't change, and Taiwan doesn't change, and Vietnam doesn't change, and Brazil doesn't change. Only Europe changes in this scenario. You just divide up the European countries. So I thought you were maybe suggesting that the European countries just battle it out. But if you do just like a worldwide thing like this, then all you've done is you've done All-Stars, but you've nerfed the potential pool Europe can take from.
Okay. I mean, because we haven't talked about TSM on this episode, and what is it? It's a tradition of the show. How do you think TSM How do you think TSM Broken Blade will do in NALCS? I don't know much about Broken Blade. I looked up the solo queue games. I watched some in-houses. I'm sure you know more because he's from Europe.
I don't have an authoritative opinion on NA tops though. That's the problem. But I would assume on the pure basis that he's European that he's going to shit on absolutely everybody and their mums. And I'll make a €10 bet with Loco Doco that he is topping in stats 4 weeks in. on the pure basis that he's European, and we'll see how that goes.
Is he like? Have you watched him in Europe? Like, is he good? Like, is it just?
I haven't watched him play North American solo queue. I haven't watched his stream while he's being in North American solo queue, so I can't authoritatively say. But I will say that he was. Because I've been naming Arome, Yopper, Shemek, Ice Beasto and stuff, Broken Blade's name would absolutely be up there as a player that I would be taking over a lot of the top laners that are already in LCS. So I think it's an absolute correct decision to take him unless North American top lane talent is exceptionally strong and I just don't know about it. Because you guys only had like one breakthrough talent and that was on the Cloud9 roster, which, you know, were better placed to take that kind of risk than any other, and it did work out. So for all I know, there's a plethora of North American top lane talent that just got shat on by the fact that they decided to take Broken Blade instead. But I have no clue on that. I would just assume he's coming from the better server, and the way that he was developing is a quite rare way to develop, and it develops very fast. And I have every confidence in him to perform well in North America. Okay. Better than Haunter. I can say that authoritatively.
Oh, all right. So this
because I've watched Haunter. I've watched Haunter international stuff a lot, so I can say he's better than Haunter, and he can definitely take on Licorice, who I thought was the best top laner you guys sent to that tournament.
So this one says it's for veteran, but I kind of want to ask it towards Doran and also veteran. H2K's Rich has been very vocal on Twitter about poaching of players and named G2 as a culprit. What does veteran think about this, and is it widespread than people suspect? I know Doran talked a lot about poaching and how you can't really control poaching. Yeah. So yeah, veteran, can you speak a little bit on, like, I guess?
Yeah, it's really widespread. It's really, really widespread, and I'm really curious about how much of this stuff I should or should affirm more than I. Like, for example, the thing about the pool thing, I know for a fact that happened. But the thing is that, like, all this stuff is outside of the 6 months thing. And honestly, when it comes to like poaching per se, as a Riot rule, this is another one of those rules that benefit the organizations at expense of the players that I don't necessarily agree with being in place. But that being said, given that it is in place, I don't think you should do it. I don't think any evidence is going to come out within the 6 month period that Riot have said that you need to do, though. But this is something that has been talked about for a while, and it's not just G2 that people have talked about it with. That if you were going to do it for G2, you could very successfully do it with Perkz, I'll tell you that much.
One thing I want to ask is, like, how do European players, like, have their social life? So from what I heard, like, back in LCS, like a year or two ago, they would all play in LCS, and after LCS, they would all go to a bar that's kind of nearby, and like all European players would drink and like party together, and like everyone would know everyone. In North America, that doesn't really happen. Like, everyone kind of little like segregated into their friend group. They have their own girlfriend, they have their own small friend group. Maybe it's like 2 to 3 LCS players like hanging out together, and even like within teams, like they don't hang out that much whenever they do have free time, and it's more so with their friends group. Like, what's like European culture like for LCS players?
I mean, what you just described is very true. Like, everyone just went to the shisha bar after LCS, after the last day of LCS, I should point out, by the way, in case anyone gets the wrong idea about that. But also, like, the casters were also there a lot, and like the hosts were there a lot, and the staff were there a lot. Like, I went there a lot as well. So yeah, I guess if how it is in NA is as you describe, it's far more social, and then obviously these kinds of conversations will end up happening. They will end up happening. The thing with G2 that has gotten people so upset is that a lot of people think that this is sponsored by the organization themselves in this event, that the organization isn't just aware of Perkz but is encouraging Perkz to do it. And I honestly can't speak to whether or not that's true because I'm not in G2. But these kind of conversations will end up happening if you are far more socially active than this. And again, I think the whole rule itself is dumb. Given that the rule is there, organizations should not look to actively do this, because if you are doing this basically in bad faith to everybody else who has opted not to do it. Not opted, but is obeying the rules by which not to do this. And you're just acting in bad faith on that manner. I can't speak of G2 themselves or talking to Perkz about this or not. And if you do manage to prove any of the incidents that were in that article, that was totally not written by Richard Lewis, by the way, then you'd still have to prove that G2 itself was actually telling Perkz to do this before you can get mad at G2 about it, and not just get mad at Perkz about it. And if you are just going to get mad at Perkz about it, I can tell you this kind of thing happens way more often than you might think. These conversations will obviously happen when everyone's just having drinks and stuff. Everyone likes theorizing about how lit it would be to be with this player that they really like and stuff, and they'll all get buddy. You, me on a fucking teammate, fucking shit on everyone. Like, that stuff obviously happens. And at what point do you draw the line as to whether it's poaching or not?
Dorian, I know you've spoken numerous times on the topic.
Sure. I would just say it's like this. It's like poaching in League of Legends is like steroid use / performance enhancing drugs in MMA or combat sports or insider trading in the stock market. Of course, people are doing it whenever they think they can get away with it. There is a type of mentality in the world where there's a key difference between, I mean, for some people, there's a difference between illegal and immoral. And as long as something's not illegal, they'll do it all day long, even if it's immoral. And then there's people where it's not even about if it's illegal, it's about if they think they'll get caught. So just as in those examples I gave there, sure, I'm sure not every single UFC fighter is on performance-enhancing drugs, but clearly a lot are. And that's why every now and then, the ones that fuck it up the most will get caught and will get exposed and will get found on a drug test. Likewise in the stock market. Not every single person's like literally cheating and breaking the rules, but there's a lot of people who are looking for that edge, and there always will be. There will always be someone to fill that niche. So even on the most like passive level, like Veteran said, it's just too easy for a player, even genuinely not trying to actually poach. Yeah. Like, hey, one day we should play together, right? That's all you need to do right there to, in theory, plant the seed of what could be poaching, right? Even if you haven't actually made an offer that, you know, your team in any way backed. And as I said when I did a video on it, my biggest problem with it is it's impossible to fully enforce because you can't really stop people doing it. You can only punish them afterwards, which then carries the obvious question of what's a reasonable punishment? Because like I said in my video, if the person you end up poaching is Jensen, is Caps, is Double, doesn't matter what the fine is. Even if the fine was like half the split, it's worth it. You might have a player that then means you're the dominant force for the next 3 years. So the fine can never be worth it in that sense to put you off. So it's always worth gambling in that particular sense. So I think it's one of those ones where I agree with Veteran. If the rule exists, you should try and enforce it. It's the same with every rule. That's why there shouldn't be stupid rules. It's just that it's impossible to fully enforce. And I also kind of agree. Like, even though Veteran can't say it, because in theory you might want to work in the LCS, the fact that the rule generally just favors teams and allows teams to sort of get a mild edge over players means I don't really cry my heart out when it happens. But I just go, oh, that's a shame. Well, it's a shame you can't catch them, really. Well, back to your little fucking office, you pleb. You didn't get a recording of me drinking a pina colada saying to him, I would love to be your support player. Oh, well, that's a shame. Move on with your life.
Veteran, so thank you so much for being on the show. Looks like you're not going to be coaching next year. Is there any plans that you might want to tell people, or anywhere we can find you, like your social media?
So I'm now entertaining a couple of offers for potentially for National League, but I'm deciding between doing that or potentially just going back into content next season, because I believe that might actually be better if you just want to build up a brand and get back into the LCS. So I'm deciding between these two things, and if I do end up doing that, then I'll give a much more fuller update. So you'll hear something from me.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you, Dorian. I guess that's the end.
Yeah, that's it.